That's okay.
I will call this meeting of the Lane County Housing and Community Service Agency, HACSA, to order at 9 o'clock on March 1st. I'm Pat Farr. I'm the vice chair of this committee, or standing as the vice chair, and today I'll gavel in, and the first order on the agenda today is to elect a new chair. So, before we get into that, actually, any adjustments to the agenda from the board? Ms. Fox, any adjustments to the agenda? Okay. Seeing none, then we'll move on to item 2, which is election of the new chair. Then, upon the election of the new chair, I will relinquish a seat and turn it over to the new chair. Do I have nominations for chair? Commissioner Massey.
I move that Sharice.
Second.
We have a double movement. A motion and a second that Shar Rivas be chair. Any further nominations? Hearing none, I'll close the nominations and we'll call for the vote. All those in favor of Ms. Rivas becoming the new chair, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously.
To move on my agenda.
Then I will find out that Mr. Fox brought the public comments. I'll leave this here for you.
Take everything. Take a minute here. Computer back on.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for giving me this opportunity. And I would like to start out before we get going here, and thank you all for your great comments when you were coming in. I appreciate it very much. It's heartwarming. So now we're going to move on to public comments. Andrea Braun.
Andrea Brown. My public comment is probably more relevant to the regular part of the meeting. I was a little bit confused by the agenda. So,
Okay.
yeah,
So it's not
I can wait till the regular
something.
meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then we're going to move on to Commissioner's remonstrance or anything. Emergency business? No? Okay, approval of the minutes. And I have something. Is there anybody else that has anything about the minutes that... Because there's a typo. Let's see if I can get them up here. So, on page 2, where Commissioner Lycan had said that I had done an outstanding job as our Shar, and I think it's got to have an A in there, and it should say chair. So, yeah, just a little, I didn't think it else. So,
Chair or Star.
yeah, whatever. So, were there, if there's...
I move approval of minutes of 1/12/2016.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, minutes are being approved then. Okay, so now we're going to go on to order 16030101H in the matter of authorizing HACSA to increase the credit line with Wells Fargo Bank by $10,000 to $27,000. And that will be Valerie.
Good morning, all. You may know that some larger agencies have P-card or procurement card programs where the agency has an overall credit limit and numerous staff members have a card, and they all use their card and it kind of goes to the same credit limit. At HACSA, we do not have a program like that. Our previous executive director, Larry Abel, was very cautious about handing out credit cards to any staff members. But as you know, as we go through life and technology expands, it is very efficient to make some purchases by credit card. So we are typically paying for travel arrangements and training for staff through the use of credit cards. But our credit card program is different from a corporate P-card program in that Carla, our HR manager, has a credit card with, a certain limit, it may be $2,000, and another staff member may have a credit card with a limit of $2,000. So, for example, in the example of Steve Joel, who's the energy services manager, he's probably got a credit card with a $2,000 limit, but if he has to send 3 staff members to a training out of town and pay for 3 tuitions and 3 hotel rooms and 3 travel allowances and meal allowances, he's going to go over. So what we've got going on in the agency now is folks running around and saying, oh, my card's maxed out, can I put something on your card this month? And my card's maxed out, can I put something on your card? So when we talked to the bank about this, they said that what we would need to increase the overall credit limit from a modest $17,000 to $27,000 was a board order. So I've prepared that board order. What we intend to do is issue 3 additional cards. So the cards are scattered around management, staff, in all of our different programs, and that the limits are between $2,000 and $3,000 for each person so they can do what they need. It's very rare that we exceed the overall limit, but it's very common that we exceed an individual cardholder's limit in a particular month, and it causes us to do the scramble or to have to make extra mid-month payments on the card. So this will allow us to be just more efficient. In the future, we may investigate a corporate P-card program, but we're taking those steps cautiously.
And just a quick add is that Valerie and I both come from organizations that have a much more robust procurement card system where cards are distributed widely among both management and line staff members. And the check and balances that we have in place in terms of accounting and oversight are very similar to what would be in place with a procurement card system. We just cheated and took some of our forms and experience from other organizations, so we do have a system of check and balances.
Questions, comments, Commissioner?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question I have on, so this should fall under like a annual or financial audit each year. Do you have a view? So again, who takes care of the financial audits for HEX?
The firm from Portland is called Bjorklund and Montplaisir.
Okay.
And what they would do in the course of their audit is to make a random selection of large payments and make sure that we have the correct backup and approvals on this.
Well, I mean, I think this is good for the temporary, but I would highly encourage you to move in a different direction. I like your idea of maybe moving into more of a traditional corporate card. I think that would make much more sense. And for one thing, it'll bring so much more consistency for you. So I view this as nothing more than a Band-Aid. And so hopefully this next year, and this is really I think to you, Jacob, is with your strategic plan coming up this next year, I would highly recommend you move in that direction. I think it'll save headaches, and like I said before, it'll bring significant more consistency for you. So this is fine, and and it's nice thinking out of the box for now. But I would agree. I think going to more of that corporate card plan would be much better for you in the long run. Thank you.
And Sid, that's a great early segue, but these are the sorts of things that we can just modify our strategic plan with and make that an explicit task, so we will follow up.
Yeah, I just think it would, I said my piece, so just alleviates the headaches. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Just kind of funny you mentioned Steve Joel and $2,000. I think I one time sold him a $2,000 table saw.
And there goes the card.
That was back in the early 80s, probably.
Any comments? Do you have a motion? Go ahead.
So I'll move approval of Order 1603-0101H in the matter of authorizing HACSA to increase the credit line with Wells Fargo Bank by $10,000 to $27,000.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Seeing none, this motion passed. Okay, so then we're going to go on to Order 1603-0102H in the matter of electing members of the Housing Plus Board of Directors. those two letters.
Okay.
You take it? Okay.
So as you all know from a couple work sessions, we've talked about the fact that HACSA 3 or 4 years ago established a 501c3. It's called Housing Plus. And I've also talked to you about the partnership that we have with Cornerstone. At this point, we're interested in pursuing a partnership with Cornerstone that could be a potential substitute for the reason why we formed Housing Plus, which was to do fundraising and some advocacy work that you can't do under Housing Authority umbrella. That said, I've also mentioned in the work sessions that just closing Housing Plus doesn't seem to be in our best interest at this time. So what we have before you today is just a requirement under the state kind of nonprofit regulations and our corresponding Housing Plus bylaws, and that is that we need to have a board member or a board of at least 5 members. So we had a few folks resign over the past few months for personal reasons. And before you today is 2 people that will continue to be on the board and 3 people that are new members of the board. I would say that we're not bringing people together to waste their time. Just so you know, this group is meeting our requirements per our bylaws, but they're also giving HACSA advice about the expansion of resident services within our organization. That's a quick highlight of this board.
What's the relationship between HACSA and Housing Plus?
That's a great question. So the relationship really is between the HACSA board and Housing Plus, and Valerie may be able to answer this question a little bit better than myself. But basically, the HACSA board approves the Housing Plus board, and then I, as the executive director, and I don't think I am.
No.
No.
The officers are members of the Housing Plus board.
Yeah.
So what is, I guess I'm asking is I understand there's a need for an advocacy organization. I understand there's a need for a separate organization from the HACSA board and the government's board. But what I don't understand is what's the relationship between and why a government board would be appointing or otherwise supervising a nonprofit. Does the HACSA board even have the authority to do that? Separate from all the other nonprofits that we work with, that we don't have a responsibility for appointing their directors. And I guess I'm setting off some concerns on my part that there's problems on both ends. There's problems on the end of HACSA because we're under authority of state and federal law, and we can do lots of things, but we have to stay within our authorized charters. And I'm not sure we can set up nonprofit corporations as being part of our job. We can certainly partner with them. We can certainly make intergovernmental agreements with them. We can make partnerships with them. We can sever partnerships with them. We can sue each other. There's lots of things we can do, but I'm not sure. I just am not comfortable saying that we should appoint members of a nonprofit and then that nonprofit then has a special relationship with us because we appoint them. And I know that the Wayne County Council has pointedly said they're not representing HACSA, and we haven't had many opportunities to dive into who is the legal counsel for HACSA. So I guess I would just like to see more information on this topic. Do other housing agencies in Oregon have set up nonprofits this way and appoint the directors?
Well, other housing authorities have what I would call nonprofit subsidiaries, which is what I consider this.
Yeah.
Whether those housing authorities have the same relationship with their county commissioners is another
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
What I can tell you is that Valerie and I were not here when Housing Plus was formed, but I know that HACSA had legal counsel when it put the bylaws together for Housing Plus, and I also know that Lane County Council reviews all HACSA board items, so this would have been vetted legally by both a nonprofit attorney as well as Lane County Council. So we certainly can go back to the originating board orders.
Is there a timeline on this?
Well, for me, and maybe Valerie can add to this, we have 2 board members and we're required to have 5 for our bylaws, and we want to maintain compliance. So for me, it is time sensitive, and what I would request is that the board approve the addition of these members so that we're in compliance with our bylaws, and then if you wanted us to come back either in a work session or outside of work meeting to go and answer some of those questions that you asked, we'd be happy to do.
Okay, we have Commissioner Farr and then Commissioner Stewart.
Thank you. Mr. Falk, Jacob, you said that you guys weren't here when Housing Plus was set up. When was Housing Plus originated?
I remember that we got the 501c3 approval from the IRS after I was working here, and I came to work in September of 13. So I think the application had gone in maybe in late 2012 or early 2013. It was an offshoot of the old strategic plan, which had a goal to diversify funding sources. So I think the original idea was that we would set up this nonprofit and they would do some fundraising and that would diversify our revenue stream. So the approval of the 501c3 probably came in late 2013 or early 2014.
From the state?
From the IRS.
From the IRS, excuse me. Okay, so I'm presuming that the original concept for Housing Plus went through the HACSA board and through the Board of County Commissioners, for that matter. Okay. So people sitting here were a part of that. Okay. Which I probably wasn't. So, okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Stewart?
Yeah, I would just add that, the reason this, Valerie explained it pretty well, the reason this was formed was to access other areas of resources that could help meet the need, which it states here the purpose of this organization is to improve the living conditions and quality of life of low-income Lane County residents, right in our bylaws here. And if you go down there to appointment of selection of directors, it states here, and probably the reason why we're here today is because we have less than a quorum, but it states that the board is the appropriate body to fill the vacancies. And it also states in Section 5, selection of directors, the initial members of the board of directors shall be appointed by the incorporator, which is HACSA. So, and then you go down here a little further to filling the vacancies, and it just says the board of directors by a majority vote of all the directors in office may elect new directors to fill in the vacancies. So I guess the interpretation of who fills the vacancies, the majority of the present directors, that would be 2. So I guess, technically, you could probably fill these with your 2 existing members if this body's a little bit concerned about.
The way that we read that is that the interim vacancies could be filled by a vote of the existing directors, but that for the full term of the following term that we would need this board to appoint. That was our interpretation of the bylaws.
I don't have a problem either way. I mean, Housing Plus was formed, it was created by us to assist us, and so to get us back into compliance with the new board members, I can understand making this plan.
Commissioner Lakin and then Commissioner Swanson.
So my question is, I guess going to Commissioner Sorenson's questions, and I'm guessing this has been vetted by legal counsel. So.
I'm having trouble understanding if the purpose, the way it's set up, is to have the HACSA board appoint a director in the event there's not a majority or a quorum for the Housing Plus board. Wouldn't we just be appointing one person and then the directors would then select the rest?
We did the same thing a year ago.
We did.
Is it any different than it was a year ago? Okay.
Well, what's the answer to my question?
I actually don't know the answer. So you're saying that this board would approve one?
Yeah, and then the board, then the Housing Plus board, which would then have a majority, would fill the other positions. We don't. It seems to me that we don't have authority to fill those other positions.
Yeah, I mean,
That's the reason that there's a provision in the Housing Plus documents that they fill positions. We don't fill positions; they fill positions.
I'm not comfortable just interpreting the bylaws without legal counsel. And my assumption is that these bylaws and this board setting up Housing Plus was fully vetted by, I know, an expert in setting up nonprofits in Lincoln. So I just have to trust that it was set up in a thoughtful and legal manner, and because of the past practice of having you guys approve for board members, that's why we came back today.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm kind of. It's interesting that it's coming up now when it didn't come up a year ago, when this same board unanimously appointed the three a year ago. But I'm curious about the questions that Commissioner Sorensen is raising, and if it's not absolutely essential that we act on this today, if we could wait to get an interpretation regarding the legality of a government agency setting up a subsidiary or whatever it may be, nonprofit. So that's my concern. So further discussion, Valerie.
Our urgency in having the new terms for the vacant positions approved by this board is related to the fact that a nonprofit needs to file an annual tax return. So in the event of Housing Plus, there really is not that much nonprofit activity going on, but we need to file an information return with the IRS in the state of Oregon. And on that information return, we need to include the names of the board members and their offices on the board, like who's the chair, who's the secretary, who's the treasurer. So we wanted to be able to file that information return with the names of board members and officers that had been appropriately appointed according to our understanding of the bylaws.
Okay, I'm not an attorney, but I'm reading directly from the bylaws, the selection of directors, and it's clear to me, talks about re-election, directors may be re-elected. Any new directors will be elected by the Board of Commissioners of the Housing and Community Services Agency of Lane County. Any new directors. And down below it talks about filling vacancies and the existing nonprofit board can fill a vacancy to the end of that term. That's all that they have the authority to do, at least under these bylaws, if I'm reading them correctly. So now whether the bylaws are legal is a whole different question. But what we're faced with today is what the bylaws specifically say, which is the HACSA board appoints all new members for regular terms. And that's clear as can be, I think, in the bylaws. And I think that the interpretation of Jacob and the staff there is correct. Not an attorney, but that seems pretty clear to me. they specifically say any new directors will be elected by the Board of Commissioners of the Housing Authority. And then, down below, when it talks about filling vacancies, it specifically says to the end of the regular term. So it's that to me is clear. We're not supposed to just appoint one and have the rest appointed. We're supposed to fill new members within the regular term. So either we do this today and they can get their tax returns filled, or we ask for a legal opinion about whether we totally screwed up in the past and we shouldn't even be forming a nonprofit as a housing authority. That's kind of the question. We either move ahead with a vote today, appoint these members, which I am. I don't know who this Larry Abel guy is, but I guess I might vote for him. We either move ahead today, or we ask, or we table this and ask for legal opinion on the whole issue of whether we correctly formed this nonprofit in the first place. Or maybe we could ask for that separately, move ahead with appointing the directors, and ask for a subsequent review of whether we've done this correctly. Those are our options today.
Commissioner Sorensen?
I was going to say, Commissioner Bozovich just hit on what I think would be a good approach, and that is, I get that there's a time-sensitive nature to it, and I get that the authority to the HACSA board, at least as we presently understand it, to appoint the board members. But I do think that these questions, maybe not all of them, but some of them raise really difficult issues that we're going to see in the future play out, and that is, as we get involved with the other nonprofit as well as this nonprofit and HACSA and the county, that there are legal issues of the representation of each of these, 4 entities that come up from time to time. And when I first got on these 2 boards, the HACSA board and the Board of Commissioners, the legal counsel was the same person for both. That has, under the current Lane County legal counsel, appeared to be that gap has widened. And then we have the nonprofit that this board was active in going along with Larry and needing a nonprofit. And now we're partnering with yet a second nonprofit, one that's a lot more, rooted and has much more assets and much more experience. Well, maybe not more experience, but different kind of experience. So I think that what was mentioned as being an appropriate topic for is like who represents all these entities, because they're doing contracts with each other, or potentially contracts with each other. Well, I guess in the case of the Board of Commissioners and the HACSA board, they're already doing contracts with each other. So that's really my point, is that we need to take a measured look at this and to try to understand as many of the complexities as possible, so that if there's ever a dispute as to who acted with what authority, that we've clarified that. And I'm okay with appointing these people today, but I think that we really ought to take a look at, and again, I get it that we have to file a tax return. I get that. We may or may not need this other entity, this entity, if we're going to make an arrangement, a long-term arrangement with community group.
I agree with you. My reading is the same as Commissioner Bozovich. I think that the compromise is just going ahead, and in a year probably it won't be needed, and it'll just be dissolved if things work out.
And just to quickly respond to this question of Lane County's legal counsel, the historical relationship between legal counsel and HACSA's, EDs, and other leadership. And you talked about at first there was, a more deliberate, close relationship, and then it's separate. I don't understand that history. And I have a meeting next week with Lane County Legal Counsel and Greg will attend that meeting as well, so that we're all just getting clarity around roles, because that's important to me.
Yeah, if anybody wants to see a little bit of history on it, it's July 11th, 2012. A pretty broad discussion was had at this board meeting. It was a Wednesday, and I was sitting right over there, as I recall. I don't remember very specifically, but the minutes are here. Everything is here regarding the discussion this board had, and the background, the organizational meeting of the nonprofit, everything is right here, so it's not mysterious. I think Commissioner Bowles' suggestion is a good one to move forward. Stay abiding by the bylaws as they exist, and then perhaps taking a look and make sure that the organization is compliant with state law. Thank you.
So what I'm hearing then is that we want to go ahead and get a motion on the table, but that we also want Jacob to give us a little more clarity on the legal part of it.
I move approval of Board Order 160301228 in the order of the matter of electing members of the Housing Plus Board of Directors.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passed. Oh, wait. Any opposition? Obviously, we had this big discussion. No. Motion passed. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Order 16030103H in the matter of approving the HACSA 2016-2018 strategic plan, and that will be Jacob.
Great. Well, Commissioners, I'm excited to be before you today, along with Valerie, just to talk about our strategic plan that we're going to ask you to officially approve today. I would also say that this is a living document, so obviously if there's additions that you'd like to make, particularly around some of the specific tasks, Ella's here to take those notes, and we can modify those tasks accordingly. But this board did, I think, a really powerful thing in 2010, and that is that you put together what I would call a time-bound, goal-specific strategic plan. A lot of organizations don't have a strategic plan that says time-bound and specific to ours. There were a lot of really smart decisions that this board made when they put together that original 5-year plan. I had the honor of coming in 2013 and contributing to that plan for 2 years. I've also had the honor of working with Valerie, yourselves, and a lot of community members about putting together this next strategic plan. One of the things that I think is important to note is that this is a 3-year strategic plan. We're proposing a 3-year strategic plan. And the reason for that is that the organization is going through so much change right now that a 3-year plan seemed more appropriate at this point than a 5-year plan. So as you know, our mission and our vision, and when in the lead up to our strategic plan, we had a couple work sessions with this board, and what I would say is historically, HACSA senior leadership and this board hadn't had work sessions. And I just want to appreciate the commission because the work sessions have been exceptionally valuable to Valerie and I and the rest of the team on a number of issues, not the least of which is developing this new strategic plan. So I put these kind of what my vision was for this new strategic plan in front of you in November, and then again, I think it was January, but we had 2 work sessions where we talked about this. And this was really shaped, obviously not just my own vision, but discussions I've had in this room and with each of you individually, along with numerous community leaders. So you've seen these before, and I won't go through them one by one. One of the things that we want to do more of at HACSA is kind of get you as a board out to look at properties. Basking Phase 1, which you've all had an opportunity to see, is now full of children and families. Directly adjacent to that site, Basking Phase 2 is under construction, and we'll be scheduling a tour for you all in that building. So what I've found is that there's a lot of folks in the community that don't know how we're structured, so whenever I do a presentation, I'm just trying to kind of make sure that folks understand kind of the reporting structure. But on the far left is Valerie, is the Deputy Director. She has finance, property management, energy services, and IT under her. To the right is Steve Oakes, who's our real estate development director. He has an asset manager and a capital projects manager that report to him. We have a rent assistance director who's Beth Oakes, and she has a single supervisor, so there's 2 managers on that team. We have our HR manager, which is Carla Ramsdale, who's here, and our resident services supervisor, who's Mary Gaddis. So this is just another example of collaboration and partnership at Quality of Vendor Resident Costing, but partnership is a big emphasis area in the last strategic plan and in this new one. We wouldn't be where we are with the strategic plan without Valerie as the Deputy Director. She really led a lot of the SWAT process. And I'm going to turn it over to her to talk a little bit more about the details related to the process.
Hi again. You probably have all been involved in various flavors of strategic planning, but one of the bedrock principles of strategic planning is that you involve all of your stakeholders. And you will recall the consultant/students that we had from U of O who assisted us, and they were in a class, and the class emphasized those bedrock principles of strategic planning. So the very first thing that we did is to identify the various community stakeholders. And that graphic, if you could read it, and I think you can read it in your own plan on page 5, includes board members, landlords, community partners, former employees, current employees, and residents. So in one way or another, whether it was in an individual interview on the telephone or in a focus group, all of those people were brought into, or a cross-section of all of those groups were brought in to contribute their thoughts on the strengths and weaknesses of HACSA in our community. And so the next couple of slides are giving us bullet points of those strengths and weaknesses. And in your full strategic plan, beginning on page 7, you have a few more words describing what is meant. So, for example, influence and reputation. Many of the stakeholders were aware of HACSA's role in our community as a major developer of affordable housing. There are other major developers of affordable housing in our community that may have very recognizable names, such as St. Vincent de Paul and Metro/Cornerstone, but there was recognition that HACSA was also one of those major players. Under mission and programs, this shows up under strengths, but this will show up again because we feel that there is not a complete clarity among all the stakeholders of exactly what all our programs are about and exactly what all our programs can do. But we do have a lot of programs, and they're funded. They may not be well funded, but they're funded. So staff and leadership recognizes that we have a group of very committed managers who are committed to HACSA's mission and who may not have been with the organization for a long time, but who have long careers of public service. Property development, we've got a sort of a rock-solid reputation as developers. A new executive director, there was a fair amount of recognition that Jacob was going to really take us in a new and very energetic direction. Partnerships, financial decision-making. I brought my little budget card out here. We've got $30 million at our disposal to do good work in the community, so it's a significant amount. On the weaknesses side, we're very sorry and feel very sad to say that customer service was pointed out as a weakness, but it's low-hanging fruit, and we have a lot of ideas how to improve customer service at HACSA. Branding and recognition, this might be funny, but like the name HACSA, it's a little hard to say. It doesn't really say to everyone, this is the housing authority, this is your community services agency, so we're going to be doing some work on that. Stagnant and declining funding is something you guys are extremely familiar with. I don't need to say another word about that. Employee morale is often a casualty of change in an organization. So where we want to slightly turn the ship, where we've got these new directors and managers with a lot of energy, our line staff might need a little help catching up with us, but we're working on that as well. Cultural competency, staff training, those kind of go together, and there's a lot of tasks in the strategic plan that are designed to help our staff deal with our populations. And stakeholder communication is all about, the tasks that you'll see later that Jacob will talk about are all about kind of raising our profile in the community, raising awareness. So opportunities, these things all kind of slide in together, right? If you've got a weakness, you need to look at it as an opportunity to improve that station. So service partnerships, community education, political advocacy, marketing and branding, client self-sufficiency, accessibility of services, housing innovations, and hot public and political issues. These are all areas that we're going to be making our own opportunities and watching for timely opportunities that come up as life goes on in our community. And threats, I'm going to read board structure. It says, while stakeholders described the current board of directors as supportive of HACSA's work, they also cited commissioner turnover as a threat, as that supportiveness may not continue. So we have confidence that you're all on board with our mission. It's kind of like Congress. Who knows what will happen in the future? So staff turnover, we're already experiencing a little heartburn from staff turnover. Some knowledge is walking out the door, and the new directors and managers are having to find documentation for, we've always done it that way, just to make sure that what we've always done that way is the correct way, and there hasn't been a change that HACSA missed. But it's a great, it's also an opportunity. It's a great opportunity for us to become confident in the way that we're moving ahead. Information, collaboration, aging portfolio. We've already had a work session on the aging portfolio. We're spending a lot of time and energy trying to figure out how to take care of that and make sure that our aging housing projects are still a comfortable and safe place for our residents and still affordable and penciling out for us as landlords. Reliance on federal funding, increasing community needs. So these are threats not only to HACSA, but to all the other agencies in our community that are working together to take care of the public.
So we wanted to do a little more than words, and again, this is another exciting development, and y'all have been really supportive, but this is the Oak support team, so I'm excited to report that we're 2 weeks away from closing on the financing for that project, and we'll be breaking ground in April. So now we're going to get into kind of the meat of the new strategic plan. The corresponding page in your packet to the next couple slides is page 10, where we get into what some of the goals are. But we'll talk about each one of these goals in more detail, but these are the 5 overarching goals for the plan. So the first objective is to increase HACSA's ability to lead and facilitate conversations about affordable housing opportunities and challenges in the local community. As Valerie pointed out, there's a lot that folks know about us, and there's even more that folks don't know about us. So really, our communications capacity is something that we need to focus on. We need to educate folks about our organization. Just one example is that there's really no PowerPoints and no executive summaries at AXA. Again, as Valerie pointed out, everybody was able to go out in the community and talk about what we did, but as new leaders coming in, we don't really have that toolbox of things that we need to communicate about what we do. So political advocacy, obviously, as Valerie pointed out, affordable housing is a big passion issue right now in our local community and in the state and across the nation. So there is a real opportunity to leverage that in service of low-income folks. And then branding is related to communications, but it's more specific around kind of who we are, what we call ourselves. When we say AXA, St. Vinny's, and Cornerstone, do people really understand kind of the size of our portfolios, the amount of federal funds that flow into the community? And I think St. Vinny's and Cornerstone have done a pretty good job, and AXA needs to kind of raise the bar. So what I wanted to make sure, I'm going to stay at this high level, but if there were any tasks that you wanted to ask questions about or add to or subtract from, feel free to blip those on our radar as I move through this. So the second strategic plan goal is related to supporting employees, and this is a big area that Valerie will be working on, so I'm going to turn it over to her.
Well, before I just go into that, I'd like to say that along the lines of goal number 1, I noticed that you're being at the City Club this Friday. So if you have nothing to do for lunch on Friday, Jacob and Terry McDonald will be at the City Club talking about affordable housing. I'm sorry I won't be able to be there, but it should be a good lunch meeting. I also just wanted to say one word about the format change. You know, our old strategic plan was kind of like in a narrative, and it was so many pages, and sometimes you'd be reading something and it wouldn't be clear exactly what goal or objective it tied to. So we're hoping that the new format works as well for all of you as it does for us, to kind of keep us grounded on where we are in the plan. So on plan goal number 2, provide employees with support to improve customer service outcomes. This came out loud and clear in the SWOT and in the focus groups, that our employees felt like they weren't clear on the consistent message. They didn't really have the training that they needed to work with our clients. They weren't sure where the line was between their work as a landlord and their work as perhaps a social service provider. And so we have a lot to do there, and we're really excited about doing that work. It also came up that our clients were not really clear about our programs. Clients in, say, the Section 8 program may not really have had any information about the public housing program. They may not have had enough information about the FSS program. So we're thinking really out of the box. We're thinking about making videos. We're thinking about new ways to do lease-ups, new ways to do annual inspections that make our clients/tenants feel more a part of the AXA team. And if they have any kind of a feeling like they're a victim or they're a helpless participant, we're really going to try to overcome that with the tasks under this goal. So these...
before you move on, Commissioner Lykin had a question.
So going back to the first objectives and on branding. So to me, this is maybe one of the biggest, most significant issues that I think we can be involved in that will help facilitate. And one of the things, and I'm not expecting an answer now, but one of the things I'd like to hear back, maybe just communicating to the entire board, as far as branding is concerned, have you reached out to different public relations firms? Have you reached out? Because my view is social networking is pretty stunning right now, what you can do on that. I think the idea of putting in a video is great, and you can do it for not very much, but it comes out significant, it comes out beautiful, and the way you can spread that message around. The branding piece, to me, is a real golden opportunity for you, and I would just really, I just highly suggest hitting that hard. And it doesn't take a lot of money. That's the beautiful thing about it. And then you control your own narrative. And so So, it's, like I said, I'm not expecting an answer today, but if you can maybe just kind of give an update to the board on if you're reaching out to different PR firms, that type of thing, on helping you facilitate that. That's great. Thank you.
Mr. Santos?
I just wanted to mention that going to the city club in June is a great thing. I'm glad to hear about that. The other thing is, in connection to political advocacy, that this does dovetail entirely with what Commissioner Lycan just mentioned, and that is that tours for U.S. senators and U.S. representatives are really great, but they're hard to arrange. It's easier to arrange tours of their legislative staff, state representatives, state senators, and the reason that this dovetails with the social media is that it's not easy, but it's easier to make informational videos around those visits. And so even if the people themselves are not famous, like the legislative assistant to Senator Wyden on housing issues, the message that's being delivered is, here we are touring this facility, it's a partnership between the federal government, this agency, and these people who live there, and maybe if it's a shared project with Cornerstone, maybe Cornerstone. It allows people to be educated, and you get to tell your story, and yet it's not just a static interview, it's actually seeing things. So in my view, the political advocacy and community education overlap with that social media component, and in a certain sense social media isn't all that different of a concept. You're talking about, instead of making a film or a slideshow, you're talking about making a shorter video that can be used with your YouTube and Facebook and other ways of getting it out to people. But old-fashioned, advocacy of going to the decision makers, the state legislators, the members of Congress, the HACSA board, city government, and showing them what you're doing is another, it's a time-honored approach, and I think it's always worth pursuing. I don't know how many tours you've ever done of state legislators or city councilors or mayors, 12 mayors of Wayne County or whatever. But those kinds of tours can be very powerful, because then those people, and I would never forget the private sector and the role of important people in our private sector, the CEOs, the organizations that they belong to, the business community, the labor community, the social service network that exists in Wayne County. All of those are very important to push that political advocacy.
Thanks to you both. In light of time, of course I want to respond, but I'm going to kind of keep us moving, and we can follow up with the email that's recommended. So the next one is let me feed you on the corresponding page. So it would be page 13 in your more detailed report. So we have a pretty amazing resident services supervisor named Mira, and the results that we're seeing from our family self-sufficiency program are really just exciting. Just as one small example, we've created 99 homeowners since 1996 with this family self-sufficiency program, so we're about to have created our 100th homeowner, and there's a number of other statistics that I don't believe have been shared with the board about the success of this program, so I'll start sharing those more proactively. My vision and our goal as a team is to expand the self-sufficiency programming for the folks in our housing. And then the second one is an area that I'm working on committees with Commissioner Farr and Chair Rivas around expanding the number of special needs populations served by HACSA, particularly homeless folks. And there's a variety of tools that I've mentioned that this housing authority has never deployed to support these special needs populations. Project-based Section 8 is one example, and we also have the ability to create local preferences for our federal programs. So those are areas that we'll be expanding into. The other thing that is important for you all to know is that it's really a priority for me to work with the other EDs from other organizations, and so the ability to co-present with Terry this Friday I think is exciting, and really there are intentional partnerships that we're putting into place that I'll continue to keep you updated on. So the next one's related to developing and preserving more affordable housing units, and the corresponding goals on page 15. So again, some of the things that we've talked about is diversifying our funding streams, which we have done in the last couple of years and will continue to do. Preserving our current assets are a big emphasis of our organization, as Valerie pointed out. New developments, a staff person came to me the other day and said that over the last 15 years, HACSA has created just over 200 new housing units. And then in the last 2 years, between Baskin Phase 2 and the Oaks at 14th, we've created over 100. So it's pretty clear to me that we can really up the new construction production at HACSA. And then innovative partnerships. I think the Cornerstone partnership is a good example of some of the innovation that we're achieving. So the next one is more internal, and I'll turn it over to Valerie.
Right. All of this great work that we're doing in the community relies on us having a very solid base in the house. We need to make sure that our staffing, our policies and procedures, our internal controls, our IT systems, this all needs to be bulletproof to support what we're doing out in the community. And the tasks are beginning on page 19. So as we can afford it, we're bringing in new technology to kind of make everyone more effective and efficient. And accountability systems, we're mulling over a lot of ways to be checking in with our tenants and our residents to make sure that they're getting what they need and what they want from us. So we're thinking very carefully about those steps, because we don't want to step on the toes or offend our staff members, but at the same time we really do want to hear from our residents and clients. So we're taking those steps with a lot of thought, but we will be taking those steps. And you can see just a bunch of different ideas we have on pages 19 through 21.
Great. Well, for those of you that have been able to tour Baskin Phase 1, again, we wanted to sprinkle this with a few images, and this is a play area that we're really excited about, and we'll try to do these sorts of play areas at all of our new developments. But this is Phase 1, which is safe image. So just to wrap up before there's any final comments, we're at HACSA, the senior management team is really committed to pushing this plan forward. As I pointed out, it's a living document, so under the goals and objectives, this board can ask us to add things, which Sid did as one example with the procurement cards. And I'm committed to a more synergistic relationship with this board. I think the work sessions have been really helpful to me, and I hope they've been helpful for you. And then we're committed to being accountable to this plan. So I do like coming back twice a year with a written report to this board as to what we have not achieved. So with that wraps up our presentation. Any input or all
Jacob, thanks for the presentation. Valerie, thank you for the presentation of the staff that is involved in preparing this. And, it goes back to the the focus groups that we had with the U of O students, and great work that went into this. I just want to comment quickly on the format that the strategic plan is laid out in. It's very easy to read. And Mr. Mokrahysky, you may see a similarity to the one that you prepared for the county, a similarity in type of strategic plan, in that you identify the goals, you identify the tasks, you identify the key individuals in participating in the task, and the measurements as far as the progress toward the completion of the task. To me, you mentioned that the senior management team is fully on board with this. And for me, it's absolutely important that even the very newest employee from the first hour on the job be fully involved in this. And I think you have a plan here that it would be very easy to involve every single level of the organization, right to the very point of the work being done at all times. And to me, Steve, that is the key to a strategic plan, is that everybody in the organization understands it and knows how the work they're doing right now, at this moment in time, applies to the overall strategic plan and funnels all the way down to the mission of the organization. I think you've done a good job in presenting that, and I'm real pleased with it. And the way your tasks are outlined, clearly they are, it's dynamic. You know, you say it's a living document, and tasks are dynamic. As new things come up, as old things are completed, the tasks will roll through and will complete, once again, complete the tasks and assign new tasks as they come up, or tactics is what I typically would call it. It's not unlike strategic plans that I've been involved with nonprofits and with private industry. Everybody in the organization is going to know exactly how they are fitting in to the work that's being done, and there's not going to be a mystery. I use that word for the second time today. No mystery in what my job is, and how I am contributing to the success of the organization. I don't think that's always been the case with HACSA. You know, HACSA's been around since 1949, and our HACSA is the second largest housing authority in the state of Oregon. I would suspect that Multnomah County, probably the one that you previously were involved with, is larger. But you know, the fact that you're making certain that people know what HACSA is, people know what HACSA does, and people know the benefits that people are receiving from HACSA through the energy, the resources that we put into it. I think we've done a great job. I'm not going to go into any details. I could pick out any one of the strategies that you've outlined here, or any one of the objectives that you've outlined here, and it's just very well done, all the way through to the timeline. So I want to compliment you on that, and compliment you on the very proactive nature of the work that has happened since you and Larry first sat here when you were new to the organization, and you kind of talked about the direction that HACSA was going to go. I'm personally very satisfied with what I'm seeing. I'm very satisfied with the fact that we are going to be providing a greater level of service for the future to the people who need the service that we're providing. Thank you.
A couple of quick questions. One is, as a resident, I noticed that there has been traditionally a disconnect between administration and residents, and I found that to be a problem, because as I got to know more people, I found a lot of support from the director and other people, and so I would encourage that over the next time that somehow you and Valerie and other people somehow get your thoughts, your feelings, or something in the newsletters or whatever. So I think people might have a good sense that we see the strategic plan, they also see it too. I, for one, would be very okay with the branding of changing the name from HACSA to the Lane County Public Housing Agency or something. It's just easier to understand, but I may be in the minority of that. And my other question is, in a strategic plan, you say you have proceeds, you have, I guess, the funds for a new administrative building. Are you saying we anticipate getting a loan and then selling the properties and paying off the loan to build a nice new administrative building? Or are you saying the funds are there?
No, we don't have the funds sitting in a reserve account to purchase a new administrative building. What it'll probably take is marketing and selling Day Island, which has our current administrative building, and potentially selling some other parcels that we have, and then there will be some debt that we would probably need on the new building. Right now, we're just getting our square footage and parking needs mapped out by an architecture firm, and then I'll come back and talk in more detail about what our needs are and kind of what my vision would be about how we're going to fund the new administrative building. we do want to actually have you come over at some point to Day Island. It is a great location, and that building needed attention a long time ago. It's literally falling into the ground. So it's going to be a big emphasis over the next couple of years.
Commissioner Sullivan?
Did you going to say something?
I was going to say something.
Well, I'll yield back. You'll yield back to me.
Okay. Now I don't remember what I was going to say. No. Totally just went. Yeah, you go first and then I'll think about it.
Okay. Could you go back to the very first slide of all these slides? This one? No,
Back further
back further.
to the beginning.
Yes. In the development of the strategic plan, I noticed that you had listed a number of, groups of people, including employees at HACSA, partners in the community, other people. Could you give an idea of whether there was a difference in opinion between the people that live in the units, the residents? They weren't called out as a group of residents, but I'm sure they were.
A focus group.
Focus group. Was their attitude different than the other groups?
What I recall
Or do you recall?
is that the residents tended to bring up their local concerns.
Okay.
My unit has a window that doesn't shut right, or the laundry room is insufficient for what our needs are. But what they kind of brought to our attention in a bigger way is that we could do a better job communicating with them and respecting them in our interactions.
Mm-hmm.
And we could do a better job giving them information about the other resources that they could get from HACSA besides the one program that they were involved in.
Yeah. One final question is that I understand that in Portland, that Multnomah County, which administers library services, that they did some partnerships with the housing agency there, and particularly noted the need for long-term learning that libraries provide and the needs of residents who either needed or wanted more access to library services. And is that something that you've ever done in AXA, where you partnered with a city like Eugene or Springfield or Cottage Grove that has a vibrant library, public library?
I'm not aware of any partnership with the library.
Like the Multnomah County one?
I'm not aware of us having done that, but we will look into that, and actually we'll get back to you.
My understanding is in Portland that Multnomah County and the housing agency there actually built a building, and part of the funding was from the library because they wanted a storefront type library, but they didn't have enough money to build a large building, so they bought one floor of a large building, and then housing was on top of that library.
I'm not familiar with that specific project. Sounds familiar, but...
So what I would like to propose is that we actually have a work session at Day Island and tour the building and the problems that you have with that, kind of look at it and just sort of get a real good visual of the difficulties you're having with the building and the parking and And my other question was, it says administrative buildings, so you're not thinking of putting both buildings together, like in a two-story or something, where you have everybody in one building instead of spread a couple miles apart?
We are. So we have two administrative buildings. They roughly have 45 employees each. And my goal would be to combine both facilities into a single facility.
Okay. Commissioner Stewart.
I was just doing a time check. We had a 10:30 time certain for the Board of Commissioners down there, so, and we still have an executive session, so if we could
Moving on.
move it along, it would make me feel better about my next job.
Okay. Yes, something.
So with that being said, I'd like to move approval of order 16-03-01-038 and approving the HACSA 2016-18 strategic plan.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Okay, motion has passed. All right, so now we're going to be going into an executive session. The HACSA Board of Commissioners will meet an executive session to conduct deliberations with persons designated by the governing body to carry on labor negotiations. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602D, which allows the HACSA Board of Commissioners to meet an executive session for the purpose listed above. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decisions may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back out into public session should the need arise.
Flip that switch.
So good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Board of Commissioners meeting for this first day of March 1st for our regular session. Sorry for the delay this morning. We had a Housing and Community Services meeting to start out the morning. So I'll adjust the agenda just a little bit. We do have a very patient individual that's been waiting to speak. So I will take public comment first, and then we'll move to our 10:30 time certain. So if Andrea Brown, if you could come forward and up to the mic here and state your name and I guess the city that you live in, and then you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Commissioner Stewart, other commissioners, it's great to be here. My name's Andrea Brown. Andrea Brown. I'm from Eugene. I'm a member of your Mental Health Advisory Local Alcohol and Drug Planning Committee, and I'll be serving as your liaison to the board. Our board received a request from the Developmental Disability Services Advisory Committee to consider asking you and your legislative committee to monitor the implementation of the Employment First initiative and to look for opportunities to advocate for changes to include expanding individual choice in employment placement options to include sheltered workshops where presently they are being eliminated. Our board has invited input from local agencies, including the ARC, Goodwill Industries, Pearl Buck, as well as several individuals affected by this initiative, and we'll continue to gather information on this initiative as we determine what, if any, our request to you might be. In addition, as I'm sure you are aware, the new CHIP recommendations do not include a focus specifically on mental health or behavioral health, but the board is hopeful that you will keep this important area on your radar. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your patience today, too. Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to the board this morning? Okay. With that, if you don't mind, we'll go right to the 10:30 and save remonstrance still after. Is that all right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So with that, I'd like to bring up Travel County for our 10:30 time certain. It's item 6B under County Administration. It's a report from Travel County, semi-annual report. I'd like to welcome Ms. Westland, the director.
Thank you, Chairman Stewart and commissioners. It is time for our mid-year, our semi-annual report to you. So you received a letter in your packet, and then hopefully you saw an email from me yesterday with a PDF deck so that you can load our presentation this morning onto your iPads just so you get a little better color brilliance with that. I want to introduce the folks who are with me today. We have our new Vice President of Stakeholder Relations, Andy Babora. I think you probably all know Andy from his long tenure at LTD, and he's going to pinch hit in terms of pushing the PowerPoint button for me today. We have Janice Ross, who's our Vice President of Convention and Sports Marketing, who's been on our team for a while. And we've got Councilor George Poling, who serves as the Eugene City Council rep to the board. And you're probably aware that Commissioner Farr serves as your representative to the board, and Administrator Mokrajewski serves on an ex officio capacity, as does Sarah Case with your Economic Development Department. So we're really happy to be here with you today, and we'll jump right into what the results for the first 6 months of the current program year are. When we go through our program of work for each of our reporting periods, we do try and generate some sense of return on your investment in our work. As you know, we are positioning all of Lane County as a visitor destination. We position the destination as Eugene, Cascades, and Coast, and we're marketing all of the communities throughout Lane County as we go into the marketplace. We have a program where we take the transient room tax that you invest in our work, and we marry it with some private leverage. So we have 570 businesses and organizations throughout Lane County that pay membership dues and bring private money into the cooperative marketing program, and then we sell a series of advertising and participatory programs to pull together an entire budget. The transient room tax makes up about 85% of our revenues, and about 15% come in from other sources. So as we go through our program areas and generate an overall return for the 6-month period, we estimate $24.2 million will come into the Lane County economy as visitor spending as a result of the work that we did during the 6-month period. Because of our continued focus on digital, the digital environment, it's becoming more and more important to our work. We did launch a digital meeting planner during the 6-month period. I encourage you to take a look at that from our website if you have an interest in it. It did pull some private contributions in from member businesses to help us fund that work, and it's a planner that we can send to convention planners digitally as we're working to prospect meetings into the area. We also updated our aging mobile visitor van that we've had for more than 20 years. We bought a more economically efficient model of a vehicle. We fully wrapped it, so we're promoting the destination while we're on the go. And with the transition from the old van, which was a very large conversion style van, into this new model, we're able to leverage this vehicle in a couple of different ways. We actually use it for staff travel rather than reimbursing mileage expense. We're using this promotional vehicle when we're traveling in the state for meetings, so we're getting a little promotional bang for our buck that way. And it is configured exactly right to load Mike the Bike if we need to transport that bike visitor center that we had created in the last program year. We can actually load that bike into this vehicle and get it where it needs to go. We're running an analysis for our governing board in terms of the sort of cost-benefit ratio of this new vehicle. We've saved about $4,000 in reimbursable expenses, and so we're really pleased to be fully leveraging the investment that we've made in this van. The other thing that we have underway, as you probably are aware, we have a couple feasibility analysis studies underway. One is on sports facilities. That facility analysis is being co-funded with the City of Eugene Parks and Rec Department and Willamette. And that study will result in a look at our metro area, how it compares to its competitive set. If there were to be investments made by either of the cities or the county in sports facilities, what would be the highest and best target for that kind of investment to both serve local residents and bring in sports business. At the same time, we're doing similar analysis around convention facilities, and we're co-funding that work with the City of Eugene and the City of Springfield. It's about a 14-week timeline, and so we'll be looking forward to sharing the results of that work with you as it comes to life. You may be aware that we are in our 5th year of very, very strong growth in visitor spending and commercial accommodation revenues. So we had 4 successive consecutive years of all-time record collections for transient room tax. We're now halfway through the 5th year, and we see room tax collections up another 15% overall. We receive visitor spending estimates on an annual basis from Dean Running and Associates. That work's funded by Travel Oregon. That work typically comes to us in April, so we don't have 2015 visitor spending estimates for you, but just to kind of keep you connected with the numbers, the 2014 visitor spending, and those are direct expenditures. There's no multipliers of any kind in any of our return estimates, was very close to $610 million coming into the county economy and visitors' pockets, with almost 10,000 jobs directly attributable to the industry. So I'm going to touch briefly on our program areas. On the convention marketing side, we have a couple of interesting digital advertising campaigns in play. One is a national digital campaign, and it is kind of keyed in on 2 concepts. One is a Meeting Geniuses concept, and the other is a Meeting Nerds concept. So those of us who are all looking at each other, we have a certain constriction we feel in our hearts sometimes when we hear the word nerds, because when we were growing up, nerds was sort of a slang term that we made fun of people with. Well, millennials love this kind of concept, and it took a little bit of work on my staff team's part to get me to go for this. But we went into the marketplace with a national digital campaign around the Meeting Nerds concept and Meeting Geniuses, and that digital campaign is pulling at 5 times the national rate. It's performing very, very well, and interestingly enough, the Nerds concept and the Geniuses concept are pulling almost equally as well. We also have a campaign in play in state featuring Florence, and you can go ahead and move to the next slide if you want, Andy. So we have a national campaign around meeting geniuses and meetings nerds, and we have an in-state campaign focused on Florence specifically as a meetings destination, and this campaign is also pulling above national standards. It's not at a 5 times rate, but it's well above national standards. One of the interesting things about these digital campaigns is we are able to connect with the companies that are driven into our site on the basis of these campaigns. We can actually get right down to the company names, and we can track who's coming in and what sections of our site they are coming at, and we can remarket to them, and we can actually do direct follow-up with them. We were recently in the Bay Area, and in an attempt to sort of leverage this new San Jose service, we wanted meeting planners in the Bay Area to be very aware of the new direct service to and from San Jose. And we did a geo-target with both of these campaigns, both of our national look and our in-state look. And they performed very, very well in that Bay Area market, over 5 times the national rate. We saw a great bump in San Jose-based companies coming into the meeting planner pages of our site, and we're actively mining those leads right now. On the sports side, we've seen a little bit of softening in our booking numbers for the period, and so whenever we see softening, of course, I'm going in to find out what's going on. In the first 6 months of last year, we booked 3 years of the NC2A National Championship contract, so that gave us a little bit of a bump. We also lost a piece of business this year that we are hoping to regain. It's kind of a mixed story. It's the Adidas Cup soccer tournament. 5,400 room nights, but right on top of our trial states. So when they realized the date conflict, they held that tournament, and we lost it for the current year because it would have taken place right in the middle of the Olympic trials, and they wouldn't have been able to get their hotel rooms. We are hoping to regain it in future years, but it gives you a little bit of sense as to what's behind these numbers, because they're pretty volatile, and this is one area where we saw a decrease from previous years, although our overall participant numbers is holding because of the mix of business that we booked, but we want to make sure we're tracking what's going on. In our social channel streams, and we maintain social channels against all 3 of our target markets. We have 3 targets: leisure visitors, convention planners, and sports planners. And we're communicating with those 3 targets in language that makes sense to them, and with triggers and motivators that make sense to them. So we can't use one Facebook page for all 3 of those targets. We actually have 3 Facebook channels set up, one for each of them, and on down the line. We compile our overall follower numbers. We're seeing increases across the board in the number of relationships that we are growing across those targets and across our channels. On earned media, on the leisure, against the leisure target, we saw 94 stories come to life in the 6-month period, reaching almost 120 million people with an economic value of just over $2.3 million in terms of what it would have cost us to actually buy that coverage. So when we look at earned media and we're driving stories, whether it's in broadcast or it's in print or it's online, in order to identify what the value of that work is, we simply look at what the rate card is and what it would have cost us if we'd purchased those stories. On the leisure side, we have, and you're probably getting to be pretty familiar with, our Adventure List campaign. We created 2 new themed packages during the 6-month period, one on fishing, which was tied to our 65 Places to Fish in Lane County project that we co-funded with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. We talked about that the last time I was with you. It's the first time they've ever branded a destination at our level in their state publications. And so we created an ad campaign to kind of leverage that work, as well as an arts package focused on Eugene that we placed into a Portland publication called Artslandia in a multi-page theme. And we've got the videos from those 2 packages. We thought we would show you what that work looks like. These 2 new packages bring to us a total of 10 in terms of our themes. So we have dune buggies, and we have ale, and we have wine, and we'll show you the fishing video. Package starts with a print ad, includes a digital ad, a video, and then has a customized landing page on our website. So all of these various aspects that make up these packages get deployed across a number of channels, but they all tie together. We'll show you the arts package too. We have 2 targeting meeting planners, one around green meetings, which is all about local food, which is a big trigger for the convention market, and the other around accessible retreat locations. And then we have a couple of sports packages around track and the state park. So as we've built out this campaign with 10 themed packages, we're still in the deployment mode for these assets, but we're not going to create anymore. We're going to move into new creative. And one of the exciting things that we're doing that will come to life during the current program year is we're launching a very robust campaign in the greater Portland area. It will actually include some out-of-home placements. We will have 4 wrapped trains in the Portland system and 6 buses. So we will have a very visible presence on a year-round basis in Portland. We thought we'd do a little bit to them what they've been doing to us with their Portland campaign. And it is one of our largest geographic population centers, and we want to make sure that they're really connected to us. We're getting a sense that the greater Portland area is becoming more and more crowded as Portlanders try and head out to their nearby recreation spots. They're having a hard time finding parking places at their trailheads. And one of the key things that this campaign is going to accomplish for us in transit, on radio, and in television is we're actually focusing in on our individual communities. So there will be an Oak Ridge visual, there will be a Florence visual, there will be a Cottage Grove visual, and there will be a Mackenzie River visual. And then we have some bonus placements that are coming out of the transit contract, and those will key in on Florence meetings and Eugene meetings. So we're really excited about it. We're looking forward to bringing that creative back to you to see at a future time. On the visitor services side, we continue to deploy our 2 static visitor information centers and 2 mobile centers. One of the challenges we're facing around driving traffic into the Adventure Center is that Tickets West is no longer a MODA center ticket outlet. And interestingly enough, we drive a lot of traffic into that Adventure Center on the basis of Tickets West because we're our Tickets West outlet. And so we saw a little softening in traffic that we are attributing to that. One of the other really interesting things we saw in our numbers around the Adventure Center is that the World Juniors made a huge impact. Our international counts a year ago for the period were quite a bit higher than they were this year. And the World Juniors took place in July, and hundreds of those visitors found their way to our Adventure Center, which is really, I mean, it shows up in our numbers as a decrease this year, but it's also really good to know that those international visitors find us when they come into town. One of the things we did in the current program year is start a new program. It's called Show Your Ticket, and we're working with local performance companies, and when they have a performance that they're fielding locally, then on the basis of showing a ticket to that performance, consumers can secure discounts at area restaurants and participants 4 days before or 4 days after the performance, and that's going very well. Within 3 months, we were up to 15 participating locations. On the website, we continue to see traffic in what's become one of our very most important initiatives. So all of our work against these 3 targets is hopefully culminating in increased traffic to the website. We've seen an increase of 11.4% in sessions, and we've seen almost 34% increase in the number of users, unique individual people coming into the site. So really great continued strong growth. I'm going to have Andy start a couple of videos where I want to talk about a project that's taking place within our integrated marketing department. Over the last year, we have worked closely with a local vendor called Avid Media to assemble a library of footage. We are creating a series of 15-second spots. 15 seconds, because that's the amount of length you can have to deploy against Instagram, which is a key driver of video content. And we have and are continuing to assemble a series of spots against themes as motivators. So covered bridges, snow, running. And also we are creating a series of videos featuring our community. So working with the chambers and cities and each of the communities, we're keying in on the highlight attributes of those communities. And as in the case with the Portland campaign, we're continuing that promise of trying to bring these community identities to life on our Bates County grant platform. So that was a key goal identified by the Travel Lane County Board at last year's retreat, and we are really making progress against that goal. The other thing that Andy's going to start to play for you is a little bit of some of the raw footage that we've assembled. And what we've done with Attic is we've created a county-wide library, and you can look for things by theme, you can look for things by geo, and we are making it available to our communities, to government departments, to really anybody who's looking to bring quality, destination-focused footage to life. And so we're seeing this show up in a variety of places. The City of Eugene has accessed it a few times. The recent hackathon, one of the challenges was around a downtown-based project. They accessed our footage. We're very happy to make it available to just increase the quality of footage on the overall destination and let people access it. We've got quite a bit of high-quality drone footage, and it's remarkable. When you look at the coastal footage, it's just incredible as you see those broad viewscapes. So those of you who are in the Travel Lane County boardroom have seen a little bit of this in the past, but we wanted to make sure that the overall board was aware that it's in place, and we encourage you to use it. We've worked with people on your team here at the county to access this footage as well. We're bringing it to bear against some of our broader economic development work. You've got a number of economic development agencies here that you're very familiar with. We partner with them too to make sure that they have access to our photography libraries, our video libraries, and we recently coordinated some work with United Airlines In-Flight magazine. As you know, they just brought mainline jets back into service here for the first time. We're really excited about that, and as they look to their annual editorial calendar, they're doing an Oregon dossier, and we actually coordinated the work to bring the different economic development agencies together, and we hope to get 3 national stories in United Airlines magazine focused in on our tech sector, food and beverage sector, wood products, tourism, and interestingly, the United Airlines In-Flight magazine only runs a national edition, so anything that we secure across the entire country, which is really great. So we wanted you to be aware of that, and if you have an interest in your particular geographic areas or any topics, I'm happy to get together with you one-on-one and make sure that you know what we have in the library. On the stakeholder relations side, Andy is new to our team. He just started a few weeks ago. We have done a little bit of restructuring. We have combined our key stakeholder audiences. That includes our members, local media, and all of our community and government officials. Those are the 3 audiences that are kind of in Andy's bucket, and many of the key messages are important to all 3 of those audiences at the same time. And so we're really trying to streamline our communications and be more effective in sharing communications with all 3 audiences. One of the things that we've been doing over the last year is meeting with individual city councils, and we are creating customized reports to those city councils. So we take the work that we bring to you and we add some community-specific projects, take it out to those councils and make sure they're aware of what we're doing within their communities. Commissioner Stewart was present when we presented out to Cottage Grove. We've been to more than half of the communities at this point, and those presentations are being very well received. The other key message point in this area for you is that our industry celebration luncheon is scheduled for May 6th. It will be at the Holiday Inn in Springfield. We hope that you'll have that on your calendars and will join us, and you'll see date announcements and those kinds of things. As you know, our board is comprised of a lot of industry leaders as well as geographic leaders. And so we have a list of who is serving on our board or who actually was serving on the board during the program period in your packet. In addition to the 30 voting seats, we have 8 or 9 ex officio advisory seats where we round up a few more folks and perspectives from around the county. We have a couple of key projects coming up I want to just briefly preview for you. We've mentioned to you in the past the great success of the Eugene Ale Trail, and we've also mentioned to you the great attention that's been paid to that program by our wine industry. So coming very soon, we'll be launching a new promotion called Pinot Bingo. It will have a soft launch in March and April and a full media launch in May. It will help incentivize visits to area wineries through a fun interactive game that we think will be very popular, and we just want to flag it for you so that when you see it, you'll pay attention to those announcements. The other interesting project that will be coming to life in the next few months has a media embargo on it, so I can't really talk about it very much, although I think you're vaguely aware that we were partnering with Google on some mapping projects over the last year. They'll be doing their international launch and announcement of that program in May, and we worked very hard to document the work that we did on that project and have provided Google some assets that we hope they're deploying as part of their project announcement that will get a little extra attention to our part of the world. So we've got some really compelling videos. We're looking forward to sharing those with you. We just can't quite do it yet. And then lastly, we included for you this time those community leaders that are serving on our Sports Advisory Council. As you know, we operate the Eugene Cascades and Coast Sports Commission, and we have a number of community business and community leaders who confer with us regularly on the work of the Sports Commission. Janice and her team are getting ready to launch the first Sportstown Awards event on June 2nd. It has really gained a lot of momentum. The Register Guard will be our presenting sponsor. We have a number of other media and health sector and business sponsors. We're actually going to hold a launch event announcing the Sportstown Awards on March 9th. At noon at the Adventure Center, and we'll get an email to you in case you'd like to be on site for that, because it'll be a nice media event. Many of our sponsors will be there, and if you're able to attend, we'd love to have you. That really wraps up the report out that I have for you on the 6-month period. Happy to answer any questions you have or field any other topics you'd like to talk about.
Great. Thanks, Carrie. Commissioner Farr?
Thank you. Carrie, thanks for the great report. 30 minutes doesn't do you justice, even come close.
Did I make it? Oh.
You did. But, I'd like to point everybody toward the website, which is, if you've not seen it, is one of the most dynamic, interesting, exciting things really in all of Lane County, I believe. You just go to that website, you can spend an afternoon having fun without even leaving your hotel room. So I visit other places. Most of our travel is in Lane County or in adjacent counties. But if other places that I visit have the same kind of attractive website that really guided you toward a trip in the area, I may be more inclined to leave Lane County more often. But if you've not looked at it, it's www.eugenecascadesandcoast.org, and there's all kinds of stuff on there. I mean, you could really easily spend an afternoon just enjoying yourself on the website. So I'm not going to talk too long because other folks may have things to say, but I enjoy being a part of the board. I enjoy working with Councilor Poling and with everyone else on the board. It's a wonderful place to spend an afternoon, have lunch, and want to congratulate you on bringing Andy on board. Andy's been a stalwart in the community ever since he was a linebacker at the U of O. And, I'm glad to see you not lined up against me. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Others? Commissioner Bozovich, then Lincoln.
Thank you. It's interesting having sat here through multiple of these reports over the years and the change in just the last 4 years in how the outreach is being done by Travel Lane and the advancements that you've done in those last 4 years. I mean, it used to be a very different industry, and you guys are like now on the leading edge of how to market travel and destination tourism and conventions and everything else, sports marketing. I feel like it's gone from where we were kind of following what everyone else did, and we're just generally doing it to where people are probably looking at Travel Lane and going, we ought to be doing it that way, because I think it's amazing the way it's changed technologically, where you're tracking, being able to follow up on website clicks to specific folks for direct marketing is just a pretty amazing change over the years. And you were asking about investments in sport facilities. I'll put in my pitch for Velodrome right now.
It's on the list.
Yeah.
I will say I'm flying to Canada next week because people are asking about the work that we're doing and want us to come and report out on it. So I don't know how you feel about me sharing our trade secrets with other places around the globe, but I think people are paying attention to what we're doing.
Yeah, it is pretty amazing. And I'll just, for those folks that want to denigrate some of what we're doing in the way of sports marketing, or even the recent kerfuffle at the state legislature around supporting the 2021 Worlds, I moved to Lane County after coming here for a sporting event. And brought my wife along, who now owns a business that's over $500,000, local employees a year. That's what sports does. I would never have even known about Lane County if I hadn't come out here for a bicycle race.
Thanks. Commissioner Lycan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, growing up in Roseburg, I actually remember Andy when he played for the University of Medford Black Tornado. When they played the University of Roseburg in football, so back in the days when only one team went to the state playoffs, so yeah, it was usually between Roseburg and Medford on who would go. So a couple questions, and I'm glad you mentioned the trail ale and that type of thing. I think that's important. It's very exciting to continue to see the craft brew industry here continue to grow, and not only with their corporate offices located here, but they're becoming so really regional and, of course, international, and I think that's a big issue. A quick comment on the wine industry. So just recently, the parent company of Kendall Jackson made a purchase of the old Evergreen, one of the Evergreen, very large building, and which tells me, man, our wine industry is really beginning to really take off. When they're willing to make that kind of investment, I'd like to see them make that investment here, but I understand because Yamhill County has their own. They believe they're the best in the state, and I argue with Yamhill County commissioners said, no, I'm sorry, you have that wrong. But maybe a quick comment on where you see that going, how that pertains to really from Travel Lane County's perspective, how that pertains to an influx not only of tourism, but I think an influx of economic development, your assessment of that. And also, I'm glad Commissioner Bozovich brought that issue up regarding the state legislature this session. I just view it's very short-sighted, and I find that to be I think, in fact, I wouldn't mind having a conversation. I've known Senator Haas for a long time. I wouldn't mind having a conversation with him and trying to figure out where he's going with this. Trying to save it, I don't know. So it'd be interesting to have that conversation. But your assessment, though, really on microbrew, or the craft brew, and also just the wine industry relating to what you do, but also economic development.
Thank you. Without question, both craft beer and wineries and food, local food, is a travel motivator. So we do leverage those industries, and as we've reported out before, we've been pretty engaged with the local food industry around regional food branding, and now Lane Workforce Partnership is and the Eugene Chamber are leading a technical advisory group for that sector. Ninkasi is one of the lead stories that we pitched to United Airlines in-flight magazine. You may know that they'll be a significant sponsor of the trials this year. There'll be a special brew produced with the trials, and Ninkasi is they're one of the top 35 breweries in the entire nation and continue to grow very rapidly. On the wine front, we have a couple of wineries that took double golds this year. King Estate took a double gold. Iris Winery took a double gold. Not only the number of wineries we have is growing, but the quality of the wines that are being produced in our part of the state is really gaining attention, and our wineries are being acknowledged for the high-quality product that they're producing. And for many years, our friends in the North Valley felt that their wines were superior, and I think that impartial judges are showing that our wines are holding up quite well. So we have a sense that our wine product is a great draw, maybe not because of its lesser density than the North Valley, may not be as well known, and we're hoping Pinot Bingo helps with that. It will be featured in the transit campaign in Portland. It will also be featured, we'll be deploying local transit radio and television as well that will highlight these small individual communities here to our own metro area. We'll build brand ambassadors here, so when people have visiting friends and relatives in, they're keeping them closer to home and not necessarily taking them to Central Oregon or the North Valley. And then we'll also be visible for visitors that are in market and help drive them to Pinot Bingo and the Eugene Ale Trail and our individual communities as well. So we're very excited about that campaign, and we definitely feel that the beverage industry is a key motivator. I will say that I think that the Kendall Jackson purchase probably has there are mixed reviews on whether that's good news or not, but from an economic development perspective, certainly it's great to have outside money invested. I think that agricultural segment, it's a craft industry, and so that's pretty heartfelt. In terms of the statewide legislation, it's certainly been a robust negotiation, and fingers crossed, because the funds are really needed for 2021. And I think that the travel industry in Oregon's made a pretty strong case that the money that's been invested from the first 1 point of room tax since 2003 has generated a very, very significant return for the state of Oregon in terms of growing tourism expenditures in the state. And so I feel that our delegation thought it was on pretty firm ground, not only from the perspective of supporting this international event that's important for our country as well as our state, but also supporting an industry that's proven up pretty solidly in terms of how it generates a return on the funds that are invested in the industry. So where it all comes out, I guess we're all getting that age-old lesson in legislation, but I really commend our delegation for doing their best to bring this support forward and try and get it through the session.
Couple of the comments, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner.
Real quick. On that, this last summer, I invited Vin and Sasha down to the Oregon Mayors Association and what was really interesting is that the mayors around the state were very excited, and I what's lost in this whole conversation is about, it's not just Eugene and Lane County. This is opportunities for the entire state, and listening to Vin and Sasha both communicate that to mayors throughout, whether you're in Pendleton, whether you're in on Ontario, in Central Oregon. It was amazing on the connection that was being made there, and unfortunately that got lost. I think even in the conversation in Salem is that no, this just will just affect Eugene and Lane County, which that is so incorrect.
Well, we all help pay for the Oregon Convention Center construction, and we're all going to help pay for the headquarter hotel in Portland. And this was an industry sector fee, whereas we've done a lot for Portland, just as, every citizen in the state has helped fund some of their tourism products. So.
And by the way, I was at the University of Oregon basketball game when it was announced that Tim Boyle was giving, not to the University of Oregon Athletic Department, he was giving $10 million to the Zebrafish organization. So again, that was at an athletic event that was announced. And by the way, congratulations on your recent appointment to the national board. That's fantastic. Great job. So thank you. Great presentation. Thank you.
Mr. Sorensen.
Thank you very much. Well, once again, your presentation, what you're doing is really great. I really appreciate it, and you're really on the forefront. I think Travel Lane and Eugene Cascades and Coast is really on the forefront of promoting this community and of course, primarily for the visitor economy, but as has been pointed out, many times the visitor economy leads to promoting the overall economy of the community. I've got some people staying with me during the Olympic trials from Italy, so I certainly know the reach of that. And they've been kind enough not to stay with me for the entire time, so they will be providing funding to the visitor economy when they're not staying with me. So I know that there's people from all over the world coming to this. One of my interests is in promoting our tourism economy with Northern California, and I know you're all over it, but I'll just add that the actual time to get from a community a residential address in the Bay Area to a convention is actually faster from Oakland and San Jose and San Francisco. It's actually faster to fly to Eugene than it is to fly to LA or San Diego, where most of their state conventions are held. So from the standpoint of meeting planners that are wondering, is this, an accessible destination, we can market to the entire Bay Area that our convention facilities currently, not what we'd like to see, not what we need, but currently our convention economy compares very favorably. And obviously we're all over the sports marketing, but the recent gift by the Boyles family to the U of O science and zebrafish research is another example of how many of these conferences, scientific conferences that are out there that we can compete for. And again, maybe academic would be a broader term than just scientific, but academic conferences. The other thing I'd like to bring up is that Washington, Colorado, and Oregon are unique among the 50 states, I guess we could add in the District of Columbia, that have voted to have state legalization of marijuana, both for sales as well as consumption. And we're seeing more and more interest. We had someone come to our board meeting. I can't remember why he came, but I can't remember the issue, but he mentioned sort of marijuana tourism and how different that is than most other kinds of tourism, where we're promoting something that people know about, that movies have been made about, that maybe people on the opposition have made fun of, but the reality is that more and more people are involved in this. And I'm wondering how, not to put you on the spot, but just more to understand, with the other legal, and I might add federally legal, things that people like to do that maybe not everybody approves of, like consumption of alcoholic beverages, where maybe we have come to the view that yes, there is a sad reality that some people are addicted to this and that they shouldn't use it at all, and other people who may not be addicted but use too much of it and it's harming their health. But our visitor economy is promoting, I hope, a healthy use of alcohol, and our vintners and brewers and other people are kind of part of that there's something called healthy or acceptable levels of this. What's going on in the marijuana area? Are you just like, wait a minute, this is controversial, it's not even federally legal? On the other hand, where there's money to be made, there will be people that will be out there promoting it. So what's going on if here, what's going on in the other emerging areas?
So first of all, I count on you putting me on the spot because I couldn't begin to put every topic into my report. So no worries. Let me just touch on the Northern California. What we have maintained, Janice, who had to head out to a meeting, has maintained a membership in the Northern California MPI, Meeting Planners International Chapter. For years, you're exactly spot on around that being a key target. And it's a key target for meetings and conventions, and it's also a key target for leisure. So our TripAdvisor geo-targets are, Reading is kind of in the center of our bullseye in terms of some of that TripAdvisor work. And then with the University of Oregon, as you know, they're fully renovating and expanding their EMU, their student union facility, and their conferences division is very, very focused on bringing relevant meetings and conventions into the EMU facility and passing on leads to other community facilities that might not be timed well because their capacity is really in the summer. And so fall meetings, spring conventions, we're working closely with them, and they've been a fabulous partner. In terms of marijuana tourism, it's certainly gotten the attention of the industry. I don't attend many conferences without sessions on marijuana tourism on the docket. We have heard from OLCC numerous times on where they are in their rulemaking. We have heard from the legal community on their interpretations of what would be appropriate and what would not be appropriate. And we have heard from marijuana industry advocacy organizations on what they think would be appropriate. And where we are currently is trying to provide accurate, factual information to consumers, because there are very few places that you can come in as a visitor and legally consume marijuana unless you're staying with a friend or a relative. You can't smoke it in a park. You can't consume it in a park. So those kinds of things. So FAQs around what is accurate and not getting ahead of ourselves in promoting things that would potentially get visitors into trouble. So we want to make sure that they're staying on the right side of the law. And as you know, the laws they're being written right now. I mean, there's legal work going on in Salem right now, trying to continually define and redefine the various segments of this industry, and bringing this new industry to life is really complex. It's been fascinating to watch it. I mean, I was a no voter, but it's been a very, very interesting intellectual process to watch the industry come to life and the regulatory environment come to life around it. We think that one of the greatest potentials around marijuana tourism is around technical tours, visiting grow sites, understanding the crop and the techniques around growing the crop. And the barrier to getting that work underway is that the growers segment of the industry is really just coming to life. And so it will probably be a year before grow sites are on firm legal ground. They know they're on firm legal ground, and they're really willing to allow access to those sites, because there are a lot of boomers out there who might have dabbled with marijuana in their day who really aren't even interested in being avid users, but they're very interested from an intellectual perspective about what these states are doing. And so we do think that there's some real potential there, and we've been talking about this at statewide industry meetings, and there are a couple of spots in Portland where you can get into a grow site, but at this point they're really not ready to open their doors yet until they know that they're really on firm legal ground and doing things in compliance with the law. So we're monitoring it. We are not actively promoting it. We do not have a themed package on it in our Adventure List campaign, and we don't want to get too far ahead of it. And at the same time, we're dealing with it as a legal industry and on a factual basis, and making sure that we can connect people appropriately with experiences that are within the law.
Yeah, I just did a search on marijuana tours for Oregon and came up with something called Kush Tourism. I don't know what they do. I think they're based in Seattle. So I guess that's coming, you know.
Yeah, and I've heard about bed and
cope with-
breakfast concepts where you're in a private home and you can consume legally. So I think it is coming.
Yeah. Is it illegal under current Oregon law to to have hotels advertise that you can smoke marijuana in hotels?
I can't answer that question.
Yeah.
I have thought that it
I guess it comes down to
was,
whether that's your home or not.
right. I think that, most hotels are non-smoking environments at this point.
Yeah,
And so that's non-smoking of anything.
yeah.
Now, I have heard that there are some states with legalized marijuana that, provide edibles. I haven't heard of that happening in our local market.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
you want to be really careful with providing edibles to people. They need to know what's in what they're eating. We all need to know what's in what we're eating at this point, I guess.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you so much, and really, it's onward and upward, and I just think that, particularly in the community that I represent, where you've got, the Holt Center, and you have the breweries and wineries, and you have the university, you have the whole sports component. I mean, it's a very vibrant time right now. It's really, it's really going well, and I guess the take-home message is, keep up the good work, because this has been a pretty phenomenal, and I think 2016, we're rolling out here another 10 months of 2016. Looks like it's going to be a pretty good year, and I really appreciate all your hard work and the great folks that are maybe new to the tourism industry right here at the table, but not new to this community and not new to the needs, and got the capability to really do great jobs. So thank you so much.
A point of order, Mr. Chair. We have the Health and Human Services staff in time for their presentation.
If you feel that, I'll get us moving on.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Carrie. So with that, I need to move back. We do have a couple items that need to be dealt with before we do our next item. So I'd like to, can we skip? Well, let's do Commissioner's response. Any response? Commissioner Bozovich?
I'll just very quickly mention one thing, because shelter workshops were mentioned, and I've been doing an internet radio show, the Bo's Nose Show. If you Google KRBN Bo's Nose, you can find it. My January 15th archive, which you can download for podcast, was an hour-long interview with Jan Aho of Pearl Buck, specifically about sheltered workshops and the changes in the law. And I think it's educational for anybody to hear her perspective on that.
Others? Commissioner Farr?
I have a number of things that I will move to the end of the agenda, and 2 items from Commission.
Okay. I don't believe there's emergency business, correct?
No.
Next is consent calendar. Approval to approve the consent calendar. A motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed unanimous. Okay, can we move administrator announcements to this afternoon?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
So then, and we'll move county council to this afternoon, because we do have an executive session. So I'd like to bring up item 8 now. It's Health and Human Services. It's a report, update on tobacco items from prior Board of Commissioners meetings. We have with us Alicia Hayes and Karen Gaffney. Welcome.
Mr. Chair, as Alicia and Karen get settled here, I'll just make a couple introductory comments. And I'll first point you to your newly laminated one-page strategic plan that's in front of you that we've updated after the board's updated plan that was approved recently. And call your attention to priority number 1, Safe and Healthy County. And in the more detailed version of of the board's strategic plan, Objective 1.2 is improve the health of our communities, and Strategy A is to implement the Community Health Improvement Plan, including addressing priority areas of tobacco, obesity, mental health, and substance abuse, and access to care. And so obviously this issue of addressing, reducing the impacts of tobacco on our community has been a priority for the board. Significant action was taken by the board in 2015, including new regulations on e-cigarettes and retail licensing. And as a result of that, we had a work session in September of 2015. We updated the board on our continued efforts related to the retail licensing work and communicating with cities throughout Lane County. The board at that time asked us to continue work in 4 areas. And there's been a significant amount of work among our staff in Health and Human Services and Public Health, engagement of our Public Health Advisory Committee. There have been surveys that have been conducted recently, both of residents in the community as well as of our employees, about several of these issues. And so we're here today to seek the board's direction on these four, and Ms. Hayes has some comments, and Ms. Gaffney will walk through four of these areas, and then we'll seek the board's direction on what you would like us to focus on. I will say that we've reached out to a number of communities throughout the state, and we have additional information we can share with you, but I think we'll leave that towards the end and during the Q&A portion. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Hayes.
Thank you, Steve. Chair Stewart and Commissioners, at the last Board of Health meeting, you asked for more information about 4 specific topics related to tobacco prevention in our community. Those topics were increasing the legal age to 21, a countywide tobacco retail license, tobacco-free parks, and tobacco-free county properties. Each of these items has been implemented in other communities, and they do align with the priority issues in the Community Health Improvement Plan to reduce tobacco use in our communities. And, of course, each of these would have unique implementation issues. And we're hoping today that we'll be able to talk more about that, or in the future more about those that you are interested in as we move forward. Today, Karen has a brief presentation for each of those areas, and time at the end of the presentation to get from you and to hear from you specific direction as we move forward. I also want to point out in our audience we have Christy Inskip and Stephen Brown, who are with our prevention team. So if we get stumped, we'll call on them. We'll phone a friend. I'm going to turn it over to Karen to go through the information and the 4 priorities and options for moving forward.
All right, thank you, and good morning, Commissioners. My goal is to move pretty quickly through these 4 areas because I know you've talked about them before, but this will help ground the viewing audience for us, and then as the County Administrator said, we have a couple slides at the end with options if you choose to move forward in any of these. So the first area was increasing the legal age for possession and purchase of tobacco from 18 to 21, and that has come up a number of times before in your packet. We've included a summary of a report from the Institute of Medicine about the impact of that policy change. Christy told me this morning that the current count of jurisdictions who've adopted that policy is 127, so that number continues to change with different communities acting in different parts of the country. Over time, the Institute of Medicine believes that that policy would substantially reduce smoking-related mortality, and in the shorter range would immediately improve the health of adolescents and young adults. This policy has come up a couple of times in prior sessions, but really hasn't gotten much traction as a statewide policy, and would require, if you chose to move forward, a change in lane code. The second area was to look at your current retail licensing policy and take action to make that county-wide. As you recall, you approved that last year for unincorporated Lane County and directed public health staff to work with each of the jurisdictions to adopt similar code language. Cottage Grove has adopted that policy, and it looks like Veneta is very close, and Cresswell, we met with them last week, and they are also interested in moving forward on that policy. The other change since you met in September is the legislative session has convened, and in the short session there is a bill currently pending that includes preemption language, so we'll certainly know by the end of this week whether that passes or not and what impact that might have on this particular policy. If you were to choose to move this forward in a county-wide way, we need to tackle that question that came up before about the Board of Health adopting a county-wide policy. So I know I saw Andy Clark walk in behind me, so certainly if you have questions for County Council, he'll be here to address those. The third area you asked about was tobacco-free county parks, and we talked a little bit about this back in September. Currently, there are 44 cities or parks districts or counties that have adopted a tobacco-free policy for their parks, and more are moving in this direction. In fact, most recently, the City of Eugene has announced that it's going to consider that policy. In Lane County, currently, Veneta, Cottage Grove, and Willamette Lane have tobacco-free parks policies. And in your packet, we included language that the state of Oregon has used for their tobacco-free parks, since they seem to have a similar variety of parks as the county does, with some rural and urban, some campgrounds in that mix. And this one would also require a change in lane code, and to the extent that it would impact employees, would require that we bargain that with our jurisdiction, or with our bargaining units. And then the fourth area you asked about was a tobacco-free campus, and that policy typically prohibits all tobacco use and smoking on all both indoor and outdoor properties. It would apply to the general public as well as to employees. And currently in Oregon, the state of Oregon and then 7 counties have such a policy that prohibits tobacco on all of their campuses. Some counties have adopted that administratively and some by ordinance. Here in Lane County, during the last 2 years, we did have a staff committee that convened and worked on a draft policy for the county administrator's consideration. The committee also conducted a staff survey and examined best practices from other jurisdictions across the country, as well as private entities. Ultimately, any final policy would need to be bargained with the county's unions prior to implementation. And a successful rollout of a tobacco-free campus policy really relies on strong communication, both signage for the public, but also communication with employees about cessation resources that are available. We do currently, our insurance plan includes excellent cessation benefits for employees and training. And most jurisdictions, both for tobacco-free campus and tobacco-free parks, really treat those as self-enforcing policies. So those are the 4 areas, and then just as a way to kick off the conversation for your direction, we brainstormed in each of those areas what some possible options would be if you chose to move forward. Again, back to increasing age to 21, that would be a significant policy change. So one place to start would be to schedule a work session to review the data, potential language, work with the stakeholders, and a timeline for how to move that forward. Also, there's the piece of reviewing with County Council, the Board of Health's authority to implement a policy countywide. And then the other piece is if we were instead to look at statewide policy, there could be an option for really addressing legislative action for 2017. The second area, and I'm just going to go through these 4, and then I think, Steve, I'm going to kick it back to you to talk about next steps. For item number 2, the issue really is to decide if you want to continue with the current policy of having staff work with each of the jurisdictions to provide technical assistance and encouragement for them to adopt language that's similar to the board's current language. And then, of course, monitoring the legislative process to know really what our options are in terms of any action that might take place this week. On tobacco-free parks, you have already heard from the Public Health Advisory Committee last week in terms of their support for tobacco-free campuses, which include parks. But you might ask the Parks Advisory Committee if they wanted to weigh in on other policies that jurisdictions had or provide any recommendations. This also, since we would be looking at lane code, would be an opportunity to schedule a work session to review potential policy language, stakeholders, and timeline. And then, as I mentioned earlier, in that timeline, if you were to move forward, we would need to talk about the need to bargain those impacts with applicable unions. And similarly then on the tobacco-free campus direction, we do have draft language for a potential policy now. So the next steps in that effort would be to approve final language and then develop the implementation plan that includes both those strong communications pieces and then also the bargaining with the unions. So that is my very quick update. And then I think the rest is to hear direction and questions.
And Mr. Chair, I'll just share with you a few other comments. As Karen indicated, that there is state legislation that is being contemplated in the short session. It's actually my understanding that today the Senate has a bill in front of it to consider a statewide tobacco retail licensing law. So we'll see. We're monitoring that closely. It does have, as was indicated, a preemption clause in it. We don't believe that it goes quite as far as the board's adopted retail licensing process, but I think that's important to consider, particularly as the board contemplates any further action on that front. So our suggestion to you is to consider that action, that potential action by the state, monitor it, and we may want to see what happens there before we move much further related to the retail licensing component. We also have reached out. It was indicated that there are 7 counties throughout the state that have implemented some form of tobacco-free campuses and parks, and I've reached out to those counties. I heard back from 4 of my peers around the state, and I'm happy to share. I won't go through all that now, but I'm happy to share with you their experiences, both from going tobacco-free for their campuses, as well as in some cases for their parks. So I'll just allow if you have more detailed questions about that to ask. Of course, we do know that the City of Eugene, it's my understanding, in the coming weeks, the City of Eugene will be having further discussions about tobacco-free downtown areas, and so I think that's an important component that we also monitor and factor into the board's decisions. And I think we feel, one thing that we heard from other counties have implemented similar policies. We certainly know from our work related to the licensing regulations is it's going to be really critical for us to communicate with our partners in the cities and throughout Lane County and any of the areas that the board directs us. And of course, all 7 of our bargaining units have demanded to bargain related to the impacts potentially from tobacco-free campuses and to the extent it would affect employees involved in our park. So the communication that's going to be necessary with our partners and stakeholders in these different areas is critical. So I'll kick it back to you, Mr. Chair, and again, we're looking for direction on each of these 4 areas, and based on the board's direction, we'll come back with a process, timeline, and policies for you to consider here in the near future.
Okay. So should we take each item one at a time, or do we want to talk to them all at once? Well, let's take have a discussion on the increase in the legal age to 21. Are there comments, or Commissioner Bozovich?
Thank you. And this was something that I was promoting probably more heavily than any of the others. Now, I want to make clear, the staff mentioned that these were the 4 items we wanted brought back to us. I want to make sure folks understand that we weren't unanimous in those 4 items, that I had very little interest in anything other than this first item, partly because there's data driving this item, and I think it's pretty easy to see from the report we're provided that it has a significant impact in the initiation of smoking of minors because of the pipeline that comes from the just above minors down to the minors that happens when you have a legal age of 18. It was well recognized when it came to alcohol. It's one of the reasons why after a brief flirtation with 18 alcohol in a lot of states, they brought it back up to 21. It's a very similar situation as to who provides the minors with something that's actually illegal. Older brothers, older sisters, friends, acquaintances that just get past the age limit. So I have an interest in moving forward and looking at the age 21. I don't think it has as big an issue, particularly with the fact that we are the Board of Health, and we can make countywide rules relative to health. I believe that's well documented in state law. We've been specifically given that authority. Cities have specifically been restricted from that authority by the legislature. So I think there's a very clear ability to do that countywide, so we don't get into city city, county, city unincorporated border issues, et cetera, I think it would be a very effective way to move the needle as far as, minors who we do have some responsibility to look after initiating smoking. I know I started smoking at age 15, and took me well into my 20s to finally quit. It's one of those things that just would have been a lot harder to do if they hadn't been so available to me in so many different ways. Of course, it was in a tobacco state back in the 70s, and they still had vending machines in public areas, so it was pretty easy to get a hold of. But it's one of those things I think that makes a lot of sense for us. I do not see any data about park bans that does anything to move the needle. I don't see any data about campus bans moving the needle. We've already taken care of countywide licensing for unincorporated areas. Several of our cities already licensed. Several of our cities are looking at it. I think that's a place where cooperation and continuing work with them and with the pending legislation possibly that would preempt us anyhow, we can just keep going on the path we are right now, which is, we've got cities ready to adopt, working to adopt. We can continue working with them on that. We're getting pretty much a consistent countywide program, and there's data showing that licensing does have impact on illegal sales to minors. So, those are the two items we have data that clearly show we can make an impact. And I think one of the things that really is helpful about moving the legal age to 21 is it will also match up with the laws relative to consumption of marijuana. Many of the same devices that are used to consume nicotine are used to consume THC. And trying to differentiate that as a law enforcement officer between a vaping pen that's got a THC-laced vapor or a nicotine-laced vapor is going to be really difficult for law enforcement, particularly when they're flavored, and smell like candy and whatever else. It's going to be a really difficult thing. And I think having the age match up so that a law enforcement officer knows that if they see somebody using a vaping pen at age 18, it's illegal, no matter what's in the vaping pen, I think is an important thing to have for our law enforcement folks. If we think that the age of majority for those sort of things should be 21, the age of majority for tobacco could also be 21. And I think we can lead the way in the state. As it is right now, there's nothing pending in the short session to do this. By the time they get through the long section next year and an effective date, if they don't use an emergency clause, even if they use an emergency clause, we're still over a year away. We could probably have something in place and at least get up to, as we ramp up, I don't think it's fair to go straight to 21 for those that are already addicted. As we ramp up to 19, we could be doing that by this summer. And be at 20 by next year and 21 the following year. So I would strongly encourage the board to keep working on this portion of it. I would also strongly encourage the board to track some kind of data post initiation of anything we do relative to tobacco to see if what we're doing is actually working. And if we have data on studies predicting stuff, but it's really important that we track that. And if we've passed something that's not working, think about, lifting whatever it is that's not working.
Okay. Commissioner Sorensen?
Mr. Chair, I think your idea of going down these one at a time is good. So I'll just limit my comments to number one, increasing the legal age for consumption of tobacco products to 21. I think it's important that we do this. It's important that we be clear that our outreach for the implementation of it has to include high schools, because if you're 17 and you're in high school and you're thinking you're going to be smoking legally, or you're currently smoking illegally, but you're anticipating that you're going to be smoking legally at 18, it seems like we need to have an educational component in implementing it, and that may be incorporated into the term work with stakeholders. But I just want to make it clear that I think part of the advantage of moving on on number one of increasing the legal age to 21 is that it gets our public health people, to the extent that we have any budget for this, it gets them into schools, it gets them talking with the education, public education in particular, to let them know that this is coming. If it is enacted sooner rather than later, that it's already here. And it seems to me that we want to use our countywide authority on this and move on it. The one question I have is, what's the budget for this? Like, you guys seem to be able to do things that we ask you to do, and I don't think you really do it. I think those people do it, but that's just my kind of guess after a few years up here. But you know, what kind of money do we have if we were to pursue it?
Thank you, Chair Stewart and Commissioner Sorensen. In this particular area of tobacco policy, we do have some grant funding that helps us with the implementation. Two grants in particular, our Public Health Tobacco Prevention and Education Program requires us to focus on strategies that we know will make a difference in reducing tobacco, and these certainly fall into the allowable category. And then we also, just last week, I think, maybe the week before, heard that we successfully competed for what's known as our SPARK grant, which is also through the Health Division and is specifically focused on tobacco policy and provides us some resources to do the kind of outreach and education that you're talking about. And those funds are actually from the Tobacco Master Settlement money.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to add to that a little bit, and Karen's right that we were just made aware of the renewal of the second grant that was mentioned, but not only is that funding available for this work, but we're required to do some of the things that are put forward here. And so I think it is important that the board understand that as we go out and we pursue those grants and we receive that money, many of these, and I would note particularly as it relates to the tobacco-free campus, that's one of the things that is a desire, I think, of the state, and we needed to indicate that we at least were going to work on a plan related to going tobacco-free in our campuses. So there were some resources available, and we're obligated really to pursue some of these policy initiatives.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. You know, I've told you all a lot about cigarettes and cigarette smoking and nicotine and tobacco, and Christy, you spend a lot of time in my office, and I think I've made it fairly clear how I feel about cigarettes and cigarette smoking and starting and stopping smoking. And I'm looking at the board documentation right here, and it says the policy question focuses on whether the county should raise the legal age for possession and purchase of tobacco inside the Lane County from 18 to 21. Seems pretty clear. Should we raise the age to 21? And there are a couple of elements to this, and one that I'm a little bit concerned about. Policy is relatively easy. You make a policy and it's written and you have the policy. And as far as the discussion as to whether or not the policy is appropriate, certainly is. In fact, 21's not old enough. You know, I think my personal feeling is that tobacco should be made illegal, period. It's documented that it kills people. It's killed 3 of my children's 4 grandparents. So, you know, it's not something that I have just a little bit of emotion about. But this board has always talked about how do we enforce new laws? What do we tell the sheriff to do? So what does the sheriff do if we enforce a new law that focuses on raise the legal age for possession of tobacco inside Lane County? So let's say somebody's driving up Highway 101 from California to Washington, and they get stopped and by a sheriff's deputy for speeding. Not that our sheriff's deputies stop people for speeding necessarily, and there's a pack of cigarettes in the car. How do we enforce? What happens there? I mean, what is there any consideration as to how do we, this board that has always talked about putting onuses on our sheriff's department to enforce laws that don't have any financial backing behind being able to enforce the laws? What's the discussion that's happened surrounding that?
Okay. Thank you for the question, Commissioner. Really haven't had discussion around that specific item. We haven't had direction to move that way yet. If we do, of course, we would talk to our partners. I would think it would be similar to if the same thing happened with a 17-year-old. I don't know what they do now. My guess is they probably aren't checking ID if there's cigarettes in the. But I don't know. So we would have to ask them that. I think the strength would come in terms of being able to purchase them and then that consistency about, as Commissioner Bosevich talked about, what is being vaped or what is being smoked. So I think that's where the power, if you will, of this would come into play. But Karen, do you have anything else?
I guess I would only add, yes, I agree with Alicia that it would be similar to how we approach 17-year-olds now. My sense from the conversations I've had over the years with the Sheriff's Office, and we haven't specifically talked about this policy, but rarely is a tobacco citation, people don't get pulled over just for tobacco. It typically is in the course of another incident that's occurring that would come up. So in terms of extra costs, we haven't heard that. What we have noticed, in the same way that citations for alcohol are often the ability to help divert to treatment. When we talk about 17-year-olds, we have teen courts, for instance, where there's an opportunity to direct people to cessation resources, or in the case of alcohol, treatment resources. So there's that side of the system as well. But we wouldn't, people wouldn't be taken to jail for possessing a cigarette if they were 19 years old. But it would clearly be a violation. And I think in terms of effectiveness of these policies, it isn't as much the citations that generate the effectiveness, but it's setting the clear policy and letting people know that that's the expectation that actually results in most people complying without having to be cited.
Thank you, and I agree with your analysis of that. I think the reducing the access to the product is the main element of this. Is reducing people who are under the age, whatever age we prescribe, 21 in this case, reducing the access to the deathly substance that we're talking about. And I'm encouraged to hear that there wouldn't be any additional in your mind. There wouldn't be any additional burden on the sheriff's department to enforce tobacco laws, because once again, I believe we need to be consistent in what we ask the sheriff to do, you know, and the kinds of things that we can't tell the Eugene City Police what to do, but we can, you know, talk to the sheriff, and even though he is an elected official and has the sheriff enforces things the way the sheriff will enforce things, I'm concerned that by making possession of tobacco inside of Lane County, if you're under 21, illegal. I mean, it's illegal minor in possession of tobacco. You know, it's becomes a new offense. Becomes a new citation. Becomes a new set of sanctions for being in possession of a controlled substance under the age of 21. You know, I'm concerned that we're not stepping into some area that we're putting an unfunded mandate, so to speak. An unfunded mandate, so to speak, on the sheriff.
Commissioner Farr, I definitely want to put my marker out there and underscore, we have not spoken with the sheriff about this particular policy. So I think that's an important part of the process. I would never want to speak for him about what additional obligations it would or would not create in his department. But certainly if this was a policy option that the board wanted us to pursue, that's an important stakeholder where we would have that conversation.
Absolutely. And once again, it's no secret, if anyone who has listened to these meetings, and I don't, probably 10 people or so have listened to these meetings, I talk often about cigarettes and the harmful nature of cigarettes, and making certain that nobody should start smoking cigarettes, and we encourage people who do smoke cigarettes to find ways to stop. You know, I'm looking at the benefits of stopping smoking. If you stop smoking now, within 5 years, if you stop smoking right now, you're reduced to a normal risk of stroke. But more significantly, within hours and minutes, your body begins to heal. So when's the best time to stop smoking? If you smoke, when is it? Well, it's right now. And when will you first feel the benefits of it? 10 minutes from now. So, you know, we need to really focus on this as much as we can. But as we move forward with some of the regulations that I'm certainly going to be strongly behind. We need to make certain that we're not creating side effects that are going to be more difficult for us to actually defend and actually enforce. So thank you very much for your response. I agree. The main focus of this is reducing access to cigarettes to people who should not be smoking, which in my opinion is everybody, but certainly people under a certain age. Thank you.
Commissioner Lycan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I notice when I'm driving on the freeway, the speed limit says 65. We'll leave it at that. When I'm driving 72, I better be in the slow lane, otherwise I'll get ran over. So, age of 21, you know what? I've never smoked. My wife's not smoked. My two sons have not smoked. I'm just going to really go. I'm going to listen to Commissioner Bozovich on this one. I don't have a strong opinion one way or another. I know that you can vote at 18. You can go to war at 18. So, but if it's 21, fine. I mean, I'm not going to argue one way or another on that. I think you know my thoughts on the countywide tobacco retail licensing. Unless you would like me to bring it back up again, I do appreciate the work you're doing with the other cities, though, and I really want to say thank you very much. It's good to see that Cottage Grove, Anita, and now are considering, Crestwell's considering. I think that's important. I think the legislature got off topic. This short session decided to go in some other areas that really that's not what the voters expected them to go, and instead of focusing on the areas that they should have been, which is dealing with some of those issues from the long session, and instead of putting forth new ones that did not go to Ways and Means like they probably appropriately should have been. On the county parks, a couple thoughts here. I think from a point of I think it's a good idea. Whether, and I think it really does come down to the enforcement issue as much as anything. How are we going to enforce it? And I, at this point in time, have no idea. When ODOT just released the amount of traffic fatalities that have occurred and the amount of fatalities that have occurred in Lane County, that means that without a traffic team, we can't even enforce those issues. So that part of it becomes problematic. I think what would happen is that if we pass something and went down this road, it would look good on paper at this point in time, and I'm not sure we could, beyond that, I'm not sure what else we could do. I do, though, for instance, I think with Willamette Lane, the city of Eugene, let's not forget, in Springfield, have 24/7 police, and they have the ability to enforce, where I think Lane County, it would be challenging. On paper, I like the idea, just so you know. I think it's at least from that standpoint. I would like to get additional feedback, though, on some of our properties from the bargaining units and find out, especially, you don't want to single out a group, but I think there are some folks in particular, maybe in Public Works in that area, that it would be interesting just to get feedback where we are on that. So I think, though, continuing the conversations, I would actually, I think that's important. And so that's where I'm at right now, but I really want to say thank you for the continued reaching out to the jurisdictions and the other communities and cities in Lane County. I really do appreciate your work on that, and that's important. I do believe eventually the state's going to come around, and right now, I just wish they'd put aside their petty partisanship and actually do the work of what we ask them to do, and so I find that to be unfortunate. So those are my general thoughts.
Okay. So
taking too much time.
So just to do a time check, it is 12 o'clock. I think, though, I've heard where two of the commissioners are on all four of the items, I believe, and one item for the other two commissioners. So you think in 10 minutes we could go ahead and try to get some direction on these four items? Or are we willing to go another 10 minutes over into the lunch break? That work? Okay. So Commissioner Sorensen, you want
to? So it looks like we're ready to move ahead on one. Is that your count?
Yeah, it looks like everybody's in support of the work on.
As far as number two, when we defeated on the contested vote when we defeated the retail licensing before. Part of the argument was, well, let's if it's not fair to do it in one area because of border issues, maybe we should have countywide retail licensing. So I guess I would view that as a positive thing. And then what are the other issues on your list?
Parks.
I would like to move ahead on both 3 and 4 because other jurisdictions are doing that. And I agree that when we move ahead and we get the work sessions on those, that we make sure that we have the data that shows that these will be a beneficial policy, that they're not just something we're trying out or that other people have tried out and it doesn't work, but rather that it is documented. And I think that's part of the work session that I'm advocating for those as well.
Commissioner Park? Okay. You're the same on all the items? Okay. So I guess I'm the only one that hasn't piped up yet. So I am in support of the conversation of looking at increasing the age to 21. Countywide licensing, I'm supportive of the path that we're on right now. So I'd like to continue to work with our partners and see if they can adopt similar licenses requirements, and then also work with the legislature in Salem. Tobacco-free parks, I would like to see us take that to our Parks Advisory Committee. I don't know if that's kind of a compromise because I'm in the middle on this one here, but you know, I'd like to get their input to analyze what already is existing in other areas. I know Cottage Grove has adopted no smoking in parks, and Lima Lane for sure, and it sounds like Eugene's headed that way. So I'd like to have their input on that. And as far as the countywide properties, I think that to me has always just been trying to get the support of our employees to move forward with that. So I would probably put that as a item that needs to be addressed through the bargaining as we go through our different bargaining units. So so you want to try to recap what you've heard from all 5 of us?
Sure.
Mr. Mokahysky?
Be happy to. Number 1, increasing legal age to 21. I heard 4 commissioners say that they were either in strong support or generally supportive of moving in that direction, but also wanting to hear more information. Certainly, I think the discussion about impacts on law enforcement and the extent, the other question that will need to be resolved ultimately by the board is do you want to pursue a countywide ordinance or an ordinance in unincorporated Lane County? So there's some legal components to that, but we can bring that back to you for further discussion. I did hear that from Commissioner Bozovich's standpoint, the desire was to move towards a countywide ordinance. The extent to which that's what the board ultimately wants to do, I think the conversations related to law enforcement need to be expanded beyond just the sheriff's office and talking to all the municipal law enforcement agencies. So number 1 is moving forward, and we'll come back to the board. I did hear Commissioner Farr say he wasn't in support of that, but I think we have 4 commissioners that are asking us to move forward there. Anything else on?
What did you say about me not being in support of?
Of number 1?
No, I'm in support of it, absolutely.
You are?
Yeah, the
Okay.
discussion, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood your
With
comments.
the caveat that I brought up.
Okay. Number 2, what I heard from commissioners was the desire to monitor state legislation and continue the path that we're currently on, and having continuing the conversations with cities throughout Lane County. Number 3, I heard a tentative yes, with the desire to have more discussion, and the desire for the issue to go to the Park Advisory Committee for review and a recommendation back to the board. Is that fair?
Yeah. So, yes.
Yeah, okay. I heard, well, let me just be specific. I heard Commissioner Sorensen, Commissioner Farr, and Commissioner Stewart say that you were in favor of moving forward there. I think Commissioner Bozevich has expressed some questions about that, and Commissioner Lyken was open to looking at it. So I heard majority support there. And then on the last one, I heard yes from the majority of the board, with the understanding that we need to have conversations with our bargaining units that have all demanded to bargain, particularly in certain areas where they've expressed particular concerns.
With my dissent on that.
Right.
Yeah, there's no data that shows either of the last two items has an impact on actual smoking of adults that have the ability to do that under our laws. And I also feel like if we ban it from our campuses, we are going to be unwelcoming to a segment of our population that wants to come and address us as commissioners or use our services. That I think that doesn't send a good sign to, particularly a segment that's taking up an addicted behavior. So I just don't feel it's where we need to go unless somebody can show me data that it has an impact and that there's a way to measure the impact after we implement.
Mr. Chair, on the last two, I just want to provide some clarification, at least as it relates to the majority of the counties, of the 7 counties that we heard back from. It's my understanding that they implemented the tobacco-free campus and parks initiatives as policies, not as laws. And so I think that's certainly an option the board has to consider of how you'd like to pursue that. But the feedback that I received from those counties was that they found it more workable to have as a policy and to focus on education rather than punishment. So again, I think that's going to be ultimately the board's decision on what path you want to go towards. But if you're interested in what the other counties in the state have done, it seems as though that is the model that has been successful for them, is to look at implementing it as a policy and focusing on education. And then Mr. Clark is here. I don't know if there are questions or there's additional clarification related to the age ordinance.
There is not. I won't address any of the sort of legal issues as you haven't asked, but if your direction includes that, certainly I'll work with staff to assist with that issue. The only thing I wanted to mention is, to the extent that the board wants to give direction and have something come back to you, I suggest that you be the Board of Health and or joint meeting of the Board of Health and this board.
Yeah, I would agree.
Commissioner Farr, then Commissioner Lyken.
Thank you. And I'm just going to take this moment to speak very clearly. You know, if you smoke, stop smoking now. Now is the best time to stop smoking. And the reason is, one of the reasons people don't quit smoking is because they think they've taken it too far. Well, the healing effects begin immediately. If you quit smoking right now, within 72 hours, your body's going to be nicotine free. As I said earlier, within 5 years, you're going to be back to a normal risk of stroke. Your heart will be stronger. And within 10 days, you'll be down to less than 2 craving episodes per day. If you really want to read more about it, go to whyquit.com, and it'll tell you why you should quit. Do yourself a favor, do your family a favor, do everybody around you a favor. Quit smoking right now.
Mr. Lyken.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As long as we don't ban Reese's peanut butter cups, I'll be happy on that. So I do have so this is interesting, because while they weren't smoking in the room, but when we took up the issue of marijuana legislation, I mean, I don't know about anybody else up here, but after the meeting, I was looking for the largest bag of Doritos that I could find, and afterwards, so they weren't actually smoking in here, but obviously, I think we were all smelling something, and so my question is, they're not smoking, but that last I checked, this was in Lane County facility, and you were clearly getting a whiff from the audience. I'm not going to say all of them, but obviously there were a few. How does that pertain? So I mean, that's just something, food for thought on the issue of on our public facilities. So Just want to keep that out there, because obviously we're going to have to be dealing with a whole different item once rules are finally adopted by OLCC. And I talked to one of the commissioners yesterday, and he's pretty frustrated with the legislature right now, and because of the rule adoption. Thank you.
Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. I want to just take the chance also to be clear. Commissioner Farr is not the only one that has had family members pass away from smoking-related disease. I lost my father. I lost my mother-in-law to that. So it isn't something that just touches him emotionally. It touches everybody emotionally. But having said that, I have to look at this in an objective fashion and also think about, how we can do this that's effective. And what I'd like to move forward with is on stuff that's data-driven and objective and then can be measured afterwards as to effect. There's been some discussion about, are we creating a burden with it's already illegal to be a minor in possession of tobacco. It's already illegal to sell to a minor. All we're doing is changing the date, and the age limits on that. It's not creating additional burdens. What you will see is most stores, as was testified by the small grocers, the folks from Dairy Mart and everything else, they want to adhere to selling to the correct age group. If we set a different age group, they will adhere to that. It's a matter of changing who they'll sell to. And in that, it will change the age of initiation of smoking. And it shows the data is clear, a 25% drop in 15 to 17-year-olds initiating smoking. That would make a significant difference over time in the amount of people that smoke, the burden on our healthcare system, everything else that goes along with it. It's just like how I really favor the 15th Night Initiative in dealing with youth homelessness as a way of preventing long-term chronic adult homelessness. This is about dealing with those folks. And there can be arguments about should the age of majority be 18 or 21. I think we've pretty well established with alcohol and marijuana and concealed weapon licenses, 21 is that age majority. Saying it for tobacco is not that much difference. I mean, I would make some arguments about voting in a few, and serving in the military ought to be 21 also. I was pretty stupid at 19, but that's just, me personally maybe, but, so I don't think, that's where we're going. When it comes to some of the other things, if I can get some effective data and we're not trying to criminalize addictive behavior in adults over 21 that have made that choice, just like we've chosen not to criminalize folks that use marijuana recreationally over 21. That's where I kind of draw the line, and I feel like some of the tobacco-free parks where we actually have overnight camping, it's not city parks where it's just day use, is going a little bit beyond and making a segment of our population that suffers from an addiction unwelcome in county facilities. So I just want to be clear, that's where I stand, trying to work on where there's data, objective data, most effective, and thinking about adults' rights to have stupid behaviors in light of the fact that I've had family members pass away from smoking-related disease. I can still look at it objectively and try and do the most effective thing we can. I think raising the age limits that.
Commissioner Sorensen.
So if we set the work session, we're going to have work sessions on all of them, or none, or most of them, or what are we talking about here?
I don't know if we'll have a work sessions per se for each one of them, but there will be work continued on each one of them.
On each one of them. Well, I'm glad to see we're going to move on all of them. I also agree that we need to have some more information from you folks. I'm very interested in the drop in the addiction rate. In other words, by having these particular policies, are we dropping the number of people that continue to smoke? I'm also interested in other aspects of why it's a good idea to move forward with these. And we often do not talk about the effects of let's talk about a visitor to the Lane County parks. Right now, they can smoke as much as they want, they can smoke in front of their children, they can smoke in front of their grandchildren, they can smoke in front of their friends, they can smoke pretty much all full bore. We often talk about this issue in terms of that person's health, that they will be healthier, as is pointed out, they will be healthier if they stop smoking. Okay? And we talk about data, and we need data on whether those people are going to stop smoking or not. We haven't usually talked about what the effect is, the modeling effect of an adult who is, by our current Oregon state law, over 18, that they're smoking in front of children. They're smoking in front of impressionable people who see that as a positive thing, or may see it as a positive thing. And I'm just interested in maybe the bigger picture of what data is out there about the effects of these more distant impacts. And I think that's some of the reason I'm so passionate about it, is I think there is some data there. And if there isn't, there will be. Okay? And I really think that in promoting this, you guys need to look broader than just the addiction rate for the specific smoker that is being, being talked about here, about their rights and their responsibilities and their addiction rate and how much money it's going to cost us in health care for them, as opposed to what the societal impact is, if that can be quantified, if some tobacco researcher has done that. And I'm also interested in the enforcement, because I'm not interested in a rule that can be violated. I'm not interested in just having a rule that we say, well, that's the rule, you don't have to follow it, that's the rule. To me, that's not a good rule. That doesn't do our process much good. So I am interested in what the mechanism is, and especially the mechanism that's used a lot in the case of traffic, which is an educational. You don't pull your seatbelt on. The officer typically is not cuff you, take you into a penal facility, prosecute you, and put you in jail. That's typically not what happens. What usually happens is you have to go to a class on how important it is to buckle up your seatbelt. So to me, that's a better approach of enforcement, of providing information to people on why we have these policies.
Okay. All right, I think we've covered it all. So I think the direction was clear with that. So we'll look for rescheduling these items. I want to make it clear to the public that the board hasn't raised the tobacco use age from 18 to 21, or hasn't banned it from the parks at this point, or our facilities, but we are interested in seeing what that looks like. We have asked staff to continue to work on this and bring these items back to us so that we can have a more thorough discussion. As we've spent an hour on it, and I know that there's a lot more questions and a lot more comments that folks want to make, but we'll keep bringing this item back and working more on it, so thank you. So with that, we will move the remaining items from this morning to this afternoon. We do have a couple public works items, and we do have a long executive session that might go close to 2 hours. So with that, we'll adjourn, or recess until 1:30.